clawed at the ground until his hands bled. Then he slammed his head against the floor. This boy had hit rock bottom. His sister had been taken, and his parents died on the very same day. Blood streamed from his eyes as he swore to take revenge on those bastards. To make things even worse, he was on a bus that crashed through a bridge and plunged straight into the river. He struggled to escape the wreckage with someone on his back. The girl who had fallen on top of him tried to call emergency services, but instead, she accidentally started a live broadcast to the entire world. Everyone watched as the bus lay submerged in the raging river. Then they saw someone emerging from the water carrying 5 people at once. That man was the one who had lost everything. He was bringing everyone to safety. The people on the bridge were in complete panic. One mother screamed for her son, who was still trapped inside the overturned bus. Without hesitation, the protagonist dove back into the wreck. With his glowing yellow eyes, he could see through everything. He found the boy, but the passage had collapsed shut. The people above had no idea what was happening. Then, with sheer brute force, he ripped apart the bus's metal frame underwater. This guy was an absolute beast. He had spent 5 years as a ruthless mercenary in a brutal war. After discovering that the Seven Stars Society was responsible for destroying his family, he returned seeking revenge, and he will tear apart anyone who stands in his way. Days later, the entire city continues searching for the whereabouts of the mysterious hero. In the offices, people comment on the wanted poster they spread around. The reporter then asks if anyone managed to find the accident hero. At that moment, the company receives several calls from people with supposed information about him. But annoyed, the boss hangs up the phone and complains that everything is a prank. Tired, the reporter regrets having suggested this search for the hero. Looking to the side, she complains that all the information is completely false, because everyone is just cosplaying him on social media now. Suddenly, she receives a notification of a new email on her computer. Without much hope, she looks at the screen and seems quite discouraged. With her back to her colleague, she calls him over to show the news. Warning that she's leaving, she grabs her things and runs to the door. Not understanding, the colleague asks where she's going in such a hurry. But on the computer screen, he sees the hero's photo and understands. Alone on the road, a car drives through the city during the dark night. Driving down the road, a solitary car follows its path during the dark night. On the phone, the reporter confirms she's arriving at the agreed meeting place. Then, she speeds down a long, empty road in the middle of the forest. Getting closer, she finally spots the sign pointing to the cemetery. Soon after, she parks the car and prepares to meet her informant. Showing the photo, she asks the man if he is Akiyama Takeru. Taking off his cap, the guy confirms his identity with a smile on his face. Remembering the past, he says he saw the hero there a few months ago. Besides that, he spent the whole time drinking alone in front of the grave. After the conversation, she goes to the grave that belongs to the Yanagimoto family. Looking at the tombstone, she focuses to understand what happened there. Checking the information, she realizes that grave was made in June. Remembering the accident, she recalls the strong smell of alcohol coming from him, and she also recalls that his clothes were completely covered in mud. Putting the pieces together, she finally understands the reason for all of that. Turning to the man, she asks if he knows who is buried there. Walking through the grass, she says she's also looking for the owner of the grave. In the newspapers, the search for the bus accident hero continues strong. For having saved so many lives, it was announced that he will receive a reward. Besides that, whoever gives information about him will also earn millions of yen. Walking down the street, he thinks they should have already realized who he is. Looking to the side, he laments that his body isn't in good shape. In his hideout, he says he set a trap to attract his enemies. Analyzing a wallboard, he believes that way he'll be much safer for now. With a serious look, he suspects they have a very powerful sponsor. Then, he decides he's going to use him as bait to come to him. Looking at the wallboard, he says if he does that, he'll succeed, because that way he'll be able to find new clues about May's whereabouts. Walking down the street, he tries to remember the exact location of his meeting. Suddenly, he hears a cry for help and stops startled in the same place. Looking back, he tries to figure out where that cry for help came from. Standing alone on the street, he sees a man approaching with a car. With a strange smile, the man thanks him for making the job easier. Nearby, several thugs surround the area with their luxury cars. Meanwhile, the gang boss waits for his men to bring his target. In the alley, they grab a man to take to the gang boss. Talking about the past, one of them reveals he sold a girl out of boredom. On the table, a used syringe shows what they did to the victim. Another man brags that they overdid the dose, but that it was very fun. In a dark room, a woman is lying completely unconscious on the bed. Waking up slowly, she finds herself in an unknown and strange place. With a malicious smile, a man says he has fun with women. Holding her face, he warns that favor won't come free. With her eye hurting, the girl remembers what happened before. Suddenly, the man asks who she is, as if he didn't recognize her. Looking around, the man realizes he's completely surrounded by the thugs. At that, all the gang members approach to attack the hero. With a serene look, he just stares at the group approaching him. Beside him, the thugs wait for orders from their boss to start the fight. In the alley, the man continues holding the girl by the neck tightly. With a smile on his face, he says, "They're all trash." Then, he approaches the boss and stares at him with contempt in his eyes. Provoking, he asks if they're cowards and stares at them with a smile. Irritated by the provocation, the boss prepares to throw the first punch. Without hesitating, he advances and tries to land a hit on his opponent. But the hero defends himself and an exchange of blows begins between them. Meanwhile, the thugs watch the fight and mock the lone hero. Screaming with rage, the boss demands he repeat what he said before. In the same instant, the hero manages to catch his blow with one hand. Squeezing hard, he begins to crush his opponent's hand. With a scream of pain, the gang boss feels his arm break. Seeing the scene, the thugs prepare to attack the hero altogether. Even with his broken arm, the boss advances for a new attack. Taking a step forward, the hero prepares for the counterattack. With a quick blow, he strikes his opponent right in the stomach. With the force of the blow, the gang boss feels the air leaving. Being thrown far, he crashes hard against the concrete wall. Fallen on the ground, the gang boss lies motionless and seriously injured. Standing in the middle, the hero stares at the other thugs who remain there. Looking from above, all the thugs surround the hero with their cars. With a smile on his face, he says it was all self-defense. Facing the group of men, Ken explains that he'll only defend himself from this unfair accusation. Noticing his stance, the men in front tense up and start sweating. Then, a superior shouts, ordering all his men to advance against him immediately. With a slight smirk, Ken calmly prepares for the confrontation coming his way. The first thug charges forward with everything, trying to land a direct hit on his face. Dodging easily, Ken evades the attack while his eyes begin to glow intensely. In the same instant, he grabs the man's head with impressive force and immobilizes him. Right after, he slams the thug's face into the ground with a truly devastating impact. Seeing his companion on the ground, another man pulls out a knife and runs in his direction. Getting close, he tries to stab Ken's neck with the sharp blade, but Ken simply grabs the attacker's face, stopping the attack with just one hand. With a single movement, he throws the man away, knocking down all the other thugs. Switching scenes, Kronos and Zeus notice someone's causing a huge commotion nearby. Meanwhile, outside, the noise of the fight intensifies between the cars and containers. Because of this, Kronos orders one of his subordinates to go there and solve the problem. Accepting the orders, the man prepares to head to the commotion outside. Walking toward the noise, he realizes the intruder seems pretty strong, but upon reaching the location, he's completely shocked by the scene he finds. Looking around, he sees his companions defeated and scattered everywhere. Meanwhile, Ken just cleans his hands amid the bodies of the fallen men. Getting furious with that, the man approaches to confront Ken face to face. In the same instant, he angrily asks who's responsible for that mess. Turning slowly, Ken faces the man with a very calm smile on his face. With a smile, he replies that he was a civilian passing by who heard the noise. Not believing the answer, the man stomps firmly on the ground and advances in his direction. Shouting angrily, he tells Ken not to get cocky just for winning. Then he tries to land a powerful blow, aiming right at the middle of his face. However, the attack stops in the air before even reaching its target. With quick reflexes, Ken blocks the blow using only the palm of his hand. Right after, he grabs the man's face, covering everything with his huge hand. Releasing a dark aura, his eyes glow red as he prepares his powerful attack. Then he lands a devastating blow that throws the man violently far away. Flying through the air, the man's body goes in Zeus's direction, who's shocked. Right after, the body falls with a heavy thud right at their feet. With an expression of pure fury, Kronos looks in disbelief at the scene before him. In the same instant, he grabs a metal object and prepares to fight with it. At the same time, Zeus advances shouting, ready to finish off the intruder once and for all. Walking through the flames, Kronos slowly approaches to face Ken head-on. Noticing the approach, Ken's eyes change to an intense purple tone. Dodging at the last second, he leans back, escaping the first quick strike. Taking advantage of the opening, he counterattacks with a direct punch to Zeus's face. But coming from the side, Kronos attacks and lands a strong blow on Ken's face. In the end, Ken stands amid the bodies of all the enemies. Then, he just stares at the battle's result with a serious, tired look. From above, he observes the stopped cars and the completely silent street after the fight. Inside the car, the driver looks terrified at the scene he sees outside. Then, He slams the accelerator with all his strength to obey orders. Advancing at high speed, the car goes full force in Ken's direction to run him over. In the last second, the vehicle approaches him for a direct hit, but Ken remains standing in place, facing the oncoming car without fear. Right after, he hits the car with a powerful blow, destroying its entire front. With the impact, the driver is thrown to the side and hits his head violently. With a smile, Ken faces the man with his eyes glowing in a golden tone. Next, he shoves his arm through the car window to grab the driver. Grabbing him by the collar, Ken yanks him out of the car with great ease. Holding tight, he lifts the man in the air, who screams in complete desperation. Without hesitating, he lands a devastating blow right in the middle of the man's face. With the punch's force, he's thrown to the ground with great violence and brutality. Fallen on the ground, the man trembles with fear while looking up, totally terrified. In front of Yugo Mizukami, the driver kneels and begs for his forgiveness. With a dark smile, Ken says not to worry because he'll spare his life. Looking into his eyes, the guy seriously promises he won't take his life. Switching scenes, Aoi Miyahara suddenly wakes up with a big, unexpected start. Right after, she looks around and doesn't recognize the place where she is at the moment. Then, Ken approaches and asks the girl if she finally woke up from her sleep. With his back to her, he just tells her to stay quiet and wait for everything in silence. Turning his attention to the man, Ken warns that all of this will end very soon. Kneeling and trembling with fear, the man is now faced by Ken up close. Then, Ken orders him to hand over his cell phone, which is passed without hesitation. With the device in his hands, he confirms the man's identity as Yosuke Maida. Right after, Ken begins interrogating Yosuke about what his father's profession is. Scared, Yosuke reveals that his father is an important member of the national parliament. Then Ken asks if his father knows about the wrong activities he's been doing. Without waiting for the answer, he uses Yosuke's cell phone to call his father. In the same instant, a furious voice answers the phone, yelling at his own son. Hearing the scolding, Ken continues the call while Yosuke stays on his knees on the ground. With a smile, he interrupts the call to formally introduce himself to the guy's father. Continuing the conversation, he informs that he needs to tell about the crimes committed by his son. Listing the offenses, he accuses Yosuke of various crimes, saying he has proof from car cameras. On the other end of the line, Yosuke's father is shocked and asks if it's the police. Then he denies being a cop, explaining he was a victim of Yosuke and his friend's violence. Right after, he states he'll need financial compensation for what the guys did. Hearing this, the father yells at Yosuke, who can only apologize in complete desperation. Besides that, Ken mentions having proof of the hit-and-run attempt and that the victim is there. Then, he demands 100 million yen and a promise not to hurt the victim. Faced with refusal, Ken threatens to broadcast everything live, forcing the father to negotiate the amount. With the phone ready, he says he can start anytime, he just needs to choose the title. Explaining his tactic, he says his father would cover up any normal complaint to the media. With no more patience, the father asks Ken to say at once what needs to be done. Finally giving in, the father promises to prepare the money and not involve the victim anymore. With a satisfied smile, Ken sets up a meeting to finalize the agreement with his father. Call ended, he throws the cell phone on the ground next to the kneeling man. Turning his attention to the girl, he approaches her as she waited sitting on the couch. Looking at her, he says going home now won't solve the problem. Hearing that, Aoi gets worried, not understanding what he meant by that. The next day, a man arrives by car to deliver the agreed payment. Arriving at the location, two men hand over a briefcase full of money directly to Ken. Opening the object, he confirms the case is full of bundles of bills. Holding the briefcase handle, Ken prepares to take the next step of the plan. Then, he throws the briefcase with all the money in Aoi's direction, and she reacts. Not understanding anything, she wonders if he's really giving her all the money. With a smile, Ken says she doesn't need to thank him because he didn't talk to her father. Still confused, she holds the briefcase while he says he didn't help her out of kindness. Insisting, she states he saved her life, but Ken just smiles at the comment. He walks away and says he's just a passing criminal. Slamming the table hard, the politician shows all his anger and great frustration. With his political career at risk, he swears he won't let this slide easily. Then, he grabs his cell phone and immediately calls a contact named Yugo Mizukami. Answering the call, Yugo hears the request for him to take care of a man. For the dirty work, the politician offers a reward of 50 million yen in cash. Then, Yugo gets interested in the matter and asks for more details about this man. Smiling sinisterly, he clearly accepts the proposal to hunt the new target. In a flashback, one man alone saves all the passengers from a serious plane crash. Watching the recording, a man doubts the low-quality image is really him, but a woman confirms it right away, recognizing his face and his characteristic movements. Remembering his presence well, she recalls she could never forget that person. At that, One of the men slams the table, furious that he didn't die in the field. Totally shocked, he questions how that man managed to return after being gone so long. Then a woman says there's no time for panic, as they need to discuss countermeasures. Sitting in his chair, one of the men agrees, saying reporting would be useless for all of them. Right after, the woman decides they'll have to deal with this whole situation themselves. Turning to the side, she questions why Hugo is on the phone at a time like this. On the phone, he responds that he just sent someone to politician Maida's house. Right after, he explains that his son got into a fight with some thugs. Interrupting the conversation, Kronos tells everyone to focus on the main topic of this important meeting. While showing a news story, he asks what everyone thinks the hero will do now. Very worried, a man says he doesn't know, but that he might raid their headquarters. Biting her nails nervously, the woman says he's not a reckless fool. Biting her lip hard, she concludes he's looking for very powerful allies. Changing scenes, Aoi Miyahara rings the doorbell of a house on a very sunny day. Hearing the noise, Ken opens the door to see who's outside. Getting surprised, he finds Aoi standing right in front of him, looking at him fixedly. With a determined look, Aoi says she finally managed to find him after so long. Asking how she found him, he hears that she's been there several other times. With his arms crossed, he asks what she came to do at his house. Gesturing with her hands, she denies she's there to do an interview with him. Looking down, she explains that as a reporter, she said things she didn't want to say. Standing in front of him, she says she just wanted to genuinely thank him for all the help. After the statement, the two remain silent for a moment, just staring at each other. Breaking the mood, she asks to borrow his phone quite unexpectedly and quickly. Typing on the device, she asks why he disappeared without leaving any kind of contact. Looking at the screen, she gets confused by what she sees on his phone. Looking at the screen, she sees his contacts are divided into 3 different groups. At that, Aoi gets thoughtful while trying to understand that strange contact organization system. With her finger on the screen, she points to the last 2 and strangest categories. Then she asks what the difference is between the groups of who he calls and who answers. Taking the phone back, Ken explains the difference is who initiates the call. Because of that, she understands that the people he calls are the most important. With his arms crossed, Ken continues standing at the door while observing Aoi's reaction. Right after, she asks about the opposite group and gets embarrassed, thinking she was insensitive. But Ken runs his hand through his neck, denying she asked the wrong question. With a serious look, he explains they're people he can't refuse. At that, she offers to update her contact on his phone, but he says it's fine. With a smile, he says not answering someone who visited could become a problem. Seeing him smiling, she realizes he seems like a totally different person that way. Then, Aoi invites him for coffee as a way of thanking him for the great help. Changing to the cafeteria, the two sit at a table so they can talk better. Smiling in the cafeteria, Aoi continues the relaxed conversation with Ken right in front of her. Outside, Yugo Mizukami watches them closely from inside his car. At that, Ken comments about the world they live in, looking at the environment calmly. Meanwhile, Yugo analyzes an old news story about the rescue made by that same man. With a mocking smile, he compares the scene to a thug flirting with a girl. Leaving the cafe, Ken waits with Aoi while a taxi stops on the street for her. Already inside the vehicle, she says goodbye to Ken with a wave and a smile. In the back seat, Aoi celebrates the meeting she had, thinking about everything they talked about. Right after, she gets thoughtful while reflecting on what just happened between them, but the driver suddenly turns around, looking at her with a very aggressive expression. On the sidewalk, Ken notices something strange as the taxi speeds away down the street. Feeling something's wrong, he looks carefully in the direction the car went. At that moment, a group of people approaches him, walking in his direction along the sidewalk. Then Yugo Mizukami tells him not to worry, stating they're not suspicious people at all. Next, a man hands over a business card, introducing himself as an investigative agency. While Ken stares at the card, the man says he received a complaint about an assault. With a crooked smile, he asks for Ken's cooperation to solve the case. Taking the card, Ken pretends to regret the terrible thing that happened to the poor students in town. With a scary smile, he says he'll cooperate with the investigation of the case. Then, the men take Ken to an empty, dark park so they can talk better. Walking through the park, the man tells how the students were suddenly attacked by someone. Cleaning his ear, Ken questions if they didn't do something to deserve the attack. Stopping walking, the man accuses him of using thugs to play victim. Turning to Ken, he says he has good news and bad news about the case. Then he reveals the good news is the client doesn't want to kill him. The bad news, he says, as the group surrounds Ken under a streetlight. At that moment, he pulls a gun from his coat and loads it right away. Pointing the gun, he says Ken's annoying conversation made him nervous. With the gun pointed at him, Ken says he needs to ask just one thing before everything. With a smile, the man tells him to say what he has to say already. Looking to the side, Ken prepares to ask an important question to the man. At that, he questions if the thug had already informed the client about his capture. With the gun still pointed, the man stays silent for an instant, thinking about the answer. Smiling cruelly, he responds not yet, as he's planning something else first. Seeing the opportunity, Ken's eyes shine and he finds that very convenient. Noticing the change, the man gets completely shocked and afraid of that situation. In panic, he pulls the trigger of his gun, firing at the target in front. Dodging the shots, Ken runs in a zigzag to approach the shooter quickly. Getting very close, he grabs the man's gun with his hand at high speed. Right after, he forces the pistol barrel into the shooter's mouth, disarming him. Then, the man throws the gun away and advances, trying to land a hit on Ken. Without any difficulty, Ken holds his fist, stopping the attack with just one hand. With a single strike, he throws the man far away, who flies through the air. Then his body falls hard on the ground, while the other thugs just watch. Seeing their leader fallen, the other two men pull out their knives to attack at the same time. Advancing together, the two thugs run with knives in hand to attack Ken. Noticing the approach, Ken's eyes shine intensely as he prepares calmly. But the first man is stopped easily, with Ken holding his arm with one hand. Then, he lands a devastating blow to the thug's face, throwing him far away. Spitting blood from the impact, the man is knocked out right away with that strike. Meanwhile, the other attacker's knife falls to the ground, leaving the man completely unarmed. At the same instant, Ken picks up the knife from the ground to use it against the opponent. Holding the blade firmly, he prepares to attack the last man still standing. Right after, he throws the knife with incredible speed in his target's direction. With perfect aim, the knife hits the man's ear, who gets completely terrified. At that, the last thug falls, leaving only the leader watching everything from the ground. Then, Ken walks toward the fallen leader with a serious and very cold expression. Picking up the gun from the ground, he says the good news is he won't kill him. Right after, he cocks the gun, preparing to reveal what the bad news is. With a scary smile, he says he won't kill him, emphasizing the word well. Pointing the gun, Ken warns he'll count to 3, giving one last chance. At that, the thugs fallen on the ground start bleeding heavily from the wounds received. Seeing that, one of the fallen men looks with pure dread at the scene. Meanwhile, the leader agonizes on the ground, feeling the weight of his great defeat. At the end of the count, Ken points the gun right in the direction of his final target. Noticing the man's silence, Ken presses the gun against him to get an answer. Then he warns that trying to buy time with silence won't do any good. Seeing the man still on the ground, Ken continues to provoke him with his very direct questions. Right after, he approaches and asks if he didn't hear his clear order. With a cold look, he continues staring at the fallen man, waiting for a single answer. At that very moment, the man screams desperately, begging him to wait just a moment. But Ken simply ignores the request and places his finger directly on the gun's trigger. Then, a shot is fired, hitting the streetlight lamp and scaring the man badly. Startled, the man screams in terror as blood drips from his wound. Totally defeated, he lies on the ground, unable to show any of his previous reactions. Gritting his teeth, he finally gives in to the pressure and agrees to his demands. Next, he promises he'll never appear in front of Ken again, but Ken says he doesn't want the money, offering even more for what he needs now. With his hand extended, he orders the man to hand over his phone immediately. Terrified, the man begs, knowing that Ken wants the contact of whoever hired him. Noticing the refusal, Ken offers double the money for him to hand over the phone. With wide eyes, the man wonders if Ken knows who the client is. Taking a step forward, Ken continues to pressure the man with his intimidating presence. Without answering, he simply asks if the man thinks the Seven Stars Society is any different. In shock, the man questions how he knows that, and if he did all this even knowing. He then explains that messing with them is the same as becoming an enemy of the state. After all, the organization controls politics and the media with its power and great influence. Besides, they possess enormous wealth, with piles of money and gold bars. Even the president, he says, is nothing more than a pawn in the organization's hands. And no one, he claims, can face the 7 members, especially Yugo Mizukami, the most feared. Terrified, he warns that if Ken continues, his life will be in constant and immediate danger. Ignoring the warning, Ken yawns and cleans his ear, showing his total disinterest in the matter. Crouching down, he says he appreciates the advice, but this isn't a negotiation. With a serious look, he says there's only one choice, which is to hand over the phone. In the end, he presses the gun against the man's ear, repeating his question one more time. Pressing the gun to his ear, Ken says his ears seem to be clogged. Right after, he points the gun at his eye, questioning if there's something there. With the gun pointed at his face, the man is completely without any reaction. Smiling in a frightening way, he offers to clean everything for the man. Frightened by the threat, the men begin to flee desperately from that dangerous place. Meanwhile, Moths fly around the only light on in the dark park. Running without looking back, the leader wonders who that scary guy was. He keeps running as fast as he can, thinking he barely escaped with his life. Still running, he steps in a puddle of water while trying to get away from there. Right after, the remaining henchmen stop running, panting from the effort of the escape. Very worried, he realizes the problem is that Ken stole his personal information. With a cut on his face, one of the henchmen asks what they'll do now. Then the leader shouts furiously, asking the henchman if he happens to want to die. Seeing the situation, another man says they have nothing to show in their report. Looking up, the leader remembers the area is full of detective agencies. With a plan in mind, the leader says conflicts and ambushes are common there, so he suggests they say they were ambushed by guys from another rival agency. The sign of one of the city's agencies shows the services they offer. To support the story, he says his henchman's injury will serve as evidence, but the injured man questions if the other agencies will really cover the story. Seeing a dead moth on the ground, the leader thinks about how to get out of the situation. With a cold look, he decides the only solution is to kill everyone involved. Meanwhile, Ken observes the phone, reflecting on how the strong always oppress the weak. With a determined look, he prepares himself for what will come next in that city. Changing scenes, he goes to a hospital for a consultation with a doctor. Entering examination room 7, Ken sits down to talk with the professional. Analyzing the tests, the doctor is surprised by Ken's body condition. With a smile, Ken asks if his state is that bad, even though he already knows. Looking at the results, the doctor says his body seems like someone in their 70s. Then, Ken asks if fighting is out of the question, but the doctor simply denies it. The doctor warns that if he fights, his fist will break, not his opponent's face. Listing the problems, he mentions pulmonary emphysema, obstructive disease, and severe memory problems. Besides, his cell replacement is at the final stage, the perfect moment. That's why he went to an organization hospital, because now all that's left is to wait. Changing scenes, an elegant man walks down a dark corridor carrying an envelope. With the package in hand, he continues his way to the final destination of that delivery. Then, he opens a door and enters a room completely illuminated by light from outside. Standing at the door, he prepares to meet the people waiting for him inside. Seated at the table, a man and a woman await the start of an important meeting. On the phone, another man warns that Yugo had an unforeseen event and won't be able to come to the location. Meanwhile, a woman is curled up on a sofa, clearly traumatized by what happened. In another place, a man reports the situation to a mysterious and very powerful figure. At the meeting, a woman comments on the absences, hearing that Kazuki went to report to the boss. With a sigh, she complains it feels like any college work meeting. Handing over the envelope, the man says he needs to discuss something about Ken Yanagimoto urgently. Reading the document, he informs that Ken had a health checkup today. The woman takes the paper and carefully reads his medical exam results. With wide eyes, she's surprised to see he's not a critical patient. Then the man explains he was injured in the war and in the bus accident. With that, he concludes now is the chance to attack. But the problem is, tapping his fingers on the table, the other man confirms that Ken returned to the university. With a smile, the woman comments the university is where he wanted to do projects. Remembering the connections, she mentions the organization has a strong group on the university campus. Then she suggests that a fight at the university could be quite dangerous for anyone. With her hand over her mouth, she laughs at her own idea, finding the situation quite amusing. Next, she jokes that maybe he's an agent from some suspicious organization. Meanwhile, a man analyzes the paperwork of Ken's enrollment at the university he returned to. As a member of the security committee, he says he'll handle the matter somehow. With a smile, another man suggests writing an article without falsehoods about what happens. But a man questions if the connections they have will be enough to solve the problem. In the end, the woman decides the organization's ability users will start at the university tomorrow. Under the moonlight, a cell phone starts ringing loudly during the night. The screen lights up, showing that the contact Hermes is calling Ken at that moment. Without hesitating, he swipes his finger across the screen to answer the important call he received. With the phone to his ear, he prepares himself for the conversation with the mysterious Hermes. On the other side of the line, an upbeat voice greets Ken in a pretty casual way. With a smile, the man asks if Ken missed him during all this time, but Ken cuts the conversation short and asks directly about May's case, his cousin. Laughing at the coldness, Hermes says the case will take time and he has other information. Then he reveals that a person named Kuniyama Aki might have some clues about the case. Worried, Ken asks if Aki got dragged into the situation and if she's in danger. With his finger on his chin, Hermes thinks about how to answer such a delicate question. He explains that she's in the country, but getting to her is pretty difficult. Although it's close, the place is hard to access and very well protected against intruders. In the end, he says that Ken has business there, Unlike most people, with his hand on his forehead, Ken gets confused and asks Hermes to be more direct. Being direct, Hermes says she was captured by the 7-Star Society, to his shock. Hearing the news, Ken grips the phone tightly, feeling immense anger. Standing in the middle of the darkness, he's in shock with the revelation he just heard. Distant, he continues the call, trying to process the information he received from that call. In his room, the phone stays on the call while Ken deals with his own thoughts. At that very instant, Hermes tells him to keep running desperately until his death comes. With a smile, he adds, telling him to run until he's completely out of breath. Gritting his teeth, Ken feels the rage growing inside him, preparing for action. Soon after, he starts running through the city, jumping between buildings with great agility. Meanwhile, Yugo Mizukami receives the news that his men lost sight of Ken. Drinking a drink, he hears they were ambushed by another agency, a complete absurdity. On the phone, he complains to the doctor that the agency is also short on personnel. Saying he needs more guards, he asks to recruit the hospital security for him. With a dark plan, he thinks that if the target dies, he won't need guards. Ending the call, the politician shows his frustration with the current situation he's in. On the phone, he complains that he hates people who don't know their place. Meanwhile, a girl runs desperately through the street, fleeing from something or someone dangerous. With a sinister smile, Ken says that even those he thought were dead showed up. Watching a seated woman, a man laments that they should have stayed quiet without interfering. Grabbing a bottle, he complains that they interfere all the time, causing many problems. Then, he pours the drink on the woman's head, who gets drenched and humiliated by that. With a cruel look, he considers cutting their tongues so they can't communicate anymore. Crying in silence, the woman trembles with fear at the threat she just heard. At that moment, Zeus enters the room and warns that the 7-Star Society wants to discuss something. With a determined look, Kronos says to let them know he'll arrive at the meeting shortly. Then he orders his men to watch the woman and take her to another secure location. Outside, the woman is escorted by thugs to a waiting car. Watching the scene, a man complains that she's a troublesome and very stubborn woman. At that moment, Ken appears and asks what they're doing there with the girl. Shocked, the woman recognizes him and calls his name, surprised by his appearance. With a cigarette in his mouth, the man asks who he is, not recognizing him at the moment. Hearing the question, Ken prepares to give a very direct answer to the man. With a serious look, he says he's just a thug passing by on the street. Mocking the answer, the man laughs and blows cigarette smoke from his mouth. Still laughing, he calls him a drunk and mocks the situation that's happening. But Ken advances and attacks him with a quick strike, giving him no time. With the impact, all the thugs are thrown back with impressive force. Flying through the air, they're defeated with a single powerful blow from Ken. Fallen on the ground, the leader hears Ken say he likes the idea of being a drunk. Then, he orders them all to drink until they pass out and can't get up anymore. Next, he orders them to get drunk and cause a lot of trouble everywhere. Hearing the orders, one of the thugs gets tense and looks to the side, worried. Furious with the humiliation, he gets up and advances to attack Ken with rage. Running in his direction, he tries to land a direct hit, but Ken dodges easily. Immobilizing the man, Ken whispers in his ear about everyone's current situation. Then he throws him against the car, landing a strong blow to his head. With the impact, the man is hurled and slams hard into the car's hood. Standing near the vehicle, another man pulls out a knife and prepares for combat. Advancing with the blade, he tries to attack Ken, who just watches the movement coming. But Ken grabs his head with one hand, stopping the attack quite easily. With the other hand, he grabs his hair, ready for the next move in the fight. Then, he slams the man's head into the car, saying one shouldn't hit. With another blow, he complains that hitting your head on others is a terrible habit. Bleeding heavily, the man is held by the hair, completely without any reaction to the attack. With the thug's face bloodied, Ken lifts him up and stares at him up close. Then, he throws him to the ground, saying drunks should just sleep in silence. Hidden, the woman watches everything and calls out for Ken, worried about what's happening. Turning his face, he sees her and prepares to go meet her there. Opening the door, she faces him and complains that he took too long to arrive. Holding her hand, Ken approaches to be able to talk better about the situation. With a worried look, he apologizes and takes the blame for everything that happened. Looking down, the woman reveals she had to escape to the neighboring country to the north. Surprised, Ken hears that she heard Mizukami talking about her escaping from his control. In a flashback, Yugo Mizukami says her escape would be a big problem for everyone. Then he slams the ashtray on the table, furious that she escaped from his hands. With anger, he complains that the girl is causing more problems than expected. With a look of contempt, the woman says that if she had been wrapped up more. Hearing everything, Ken concludes it was the 7-Star Society that killed his uncles. Worried, he says she needs to go to a safe place, but she refuses. Then she reveals that her mother is being held hostage in a hospital of the organization. Holding her hand, Ken says he understands the situation and promises to help save her. With determination, he swears that one day he'll rescue her and her mother from their clutches. With a tear in her eye, the woman says she'll be fine while she's with them. Smiling, she explains that no other organization will dare target her while she's there. With a smile, she says she's more worried about Ken than about herself. Looking at him, she remembers when he and May played together, like children. At that, Ken cuts the subject and asks what they'll do from now on. With a determined look, he explains he needs to investigate some things and find important people. For that, he decides he'll enroll in the university again to start his investigation. Analyzing a pile of documents, he discovers crucial information about his target's current state. Holding an envelope, the suited man confirms that his opponent really isn't in good condition. With a smile on his face, he realizes this is the perfect chance he's been waiting for. So he decides he'll take care of Yanagimoto Ken before he can fully recover. Being Chief Kondo Kazuki, he plans to use a loophole in the law to justify his action. Placing the papers on the desk, his superior asks what kind of agent he intends to send now. With a confident look, Kondo states he'll send 2 second-stage people for the mission. Crossing his arms, the other figure questions the possibility of them also being some kind of awakened. Looking out the office window, he admits that possibility really can't be completely ruled out. After hearing the response, his superior just processes the information in complete and absolute silence. Leaning back in his chair, he finally comments that this whole situation is a bit disappointing to him. Shifting to a sunny day, someone seems unable to believe what they're seeing there. Suddenly, a brown-haired man appears shouting, shocked to find someone he thought was dead. But Yanagimoto Ken just stares at the man with a tired expression, seeming not at all surprised by the reunion. Raising his hand to his forehead, the man asks where he's been during the last 5 long years. Standing in the hallway, Ken explains he traveled to study, while the other already questions him. Thinking about what would be dirty, Ken remembers the guy is referring to an old retaliation. Meanwhile, the dirty thing Ken really did was threaten a politician's son. Out of patience, Ken's friend asked him to stop with his word games. Changing the subject, Ken looks back and asks who those people standing there are. His friend then explains they're from Paradise and came from a northern country. Looking at the group, Ken questions if they're cosplaying as mobsters at the university, but his friend says the reality is worse, and Japan's international situation is complicated. Revealing the truth, he says a new energy can transform normal humans into awakened ones. Being the developer, Japan has now become a place flooded with several of these awakened. Because of this, underworld organizations started moving to seize power. So he concludes the group is here as spies, pretending to be a cultural exchange. Then he corrects himself and says the situation is actually a bit different from that. Hidden behind the pillar, he concludes they're basically the same thing as the mafia. That being so, 3 major groups are in play: Paradise, Pure Current, and Hanrang itself. He explains they made duels a rule, settling any complaint with a fight. Because of this, the student committee that should arbitrate everything ended up losing its authority. Finding it all a waste of time, Ken just ignores the crowd and keeps walking down the hallway. On the way, a large man blocks his path and says he's in the middle. With a subtle smile, Ken simply tells the guy to get out of his way right now. Standing face to face, the two keep staring at each other, increasing the tension in the hallway. Suddenly, another person approaches to get in the middle of that forming mess. Getting closer, he asks if the big guy can't get through because of his size. Irritated by the provocation, the man accuses him of looking down on the Hanrang group. Furious at the audacity, he advances with a direct blow, wanting to shut his rival up, but the other guy blocks the attack with his arm, stopping the movement with great ease. Firmly gripping his arm, he reveals his red eyes and gives a very dark warning. In the same instant, a woman appears and tells both of them to stop that fight immediately. Looking at them, she questions if the Hanrang group is planning to break the balance of power. Right after, the red-eyed guy recognizes her as Jang Chiuxia from the Paradise group. Standing in the hallway, Ken just watches the whole confusion without showing any reaction. Pointing in his direction, the Hanrang guy says he doesn't care about himself. Not understanding anything, Ken wonders if the guy knows him from somewhere by chance. Watching the Paradise group leave, Ken says they're not such a big deal after all. He then completes his reasoning saying she's basically trash to him. Next to his friend, he just observes how the university is being treated now. Suddenly, someone runs toward them shouting and asking if the sensei is okay. Getting closer, the young man is completely out of breath because of all the running. Catching his breath, he apologizes for being late and introduces himself as Tachibana Iori. Placing his hand on his shoulder, the friend tells him not to worry so much. Still, Tachibana feels embarrassed to have been seen in a situation like this, so he explains that As they could see, this is the current situation of the student committee. Hearing the report, Ken understands the committee became just a front organization. That's why, cracking his neck, Ken seems to prepare for some action. Seeing his attitude, Tachibana asks him to take care of everyone, calling him advisor. Cleaning his ear, Ken pretends to agree to do his best with the situation. But the next instant, he's totally confused by what he just heard there. Not understanding anything, he wonders what the hell is happening in that place now. Then Tachibana asks if Sensei Sawama didn't explain the whole situation to him. With that, he reveals the sensei promised to bring an amazing person as the new advisor. Realizing the setup, Ken accuses his friend of tricking him into coming here. Turning to Tachibana, he questions if the committee is different from the other local gangs. With his eyes shining, he asks if the boy will remain humble when he receives authority. Hearing the question, Tachibana is left without a reaction, thinking about what he should answer. With his head down, he admits they would certainly change with the new power. After the response, Ken turns his back, saying he has nothing to do with them. As Ken walks away, Tachibana shouts that he will change, but for the much better. With his back turned, Ken only says that when they recover the authority they want so much. With a determined look, Tachibana promises he'll get what he wants no matter what. Hearing this, Ken smiles, knowing they'll use him as a stepping stone for their goals. Determined, Tachibana swears he'll transform that rotten school into a place of great pride. Completing his sentence, Ken smiles and shows he believes in the new president's potential. Changing to nighttime, the three sit on the grass to relax and chat a bit more. Drinking something, Ken praises Tachibana, saying he really has very impressive charisma. Excited by the compliment, the boy jokes that the most important thing in a president is being able to hold his liquor. Right after, he takes the moment to ask a slightly more serious question to Ken. So he reveals he heard some rumors that Ken was close to the feared Sensei K. Going back in time, the memory shows that Sensei with a cold and unfriendly look. At that moment, a man was lying on the ground, completely exhausted and without any strength. Showing the complete scene, Sensei K just watched the fallen man amid stains. Questioning the fallen boy, he asks if the kid was always so proud like that. Then he continues, asking if that pride came from intimidating the weak like that. Looking at the bodies on the ground, he says the boy seems to have overestimated himself way too much. Meanwhile, several other students remained fallen and defeated all over the floor of that place. With contempt, he states that being close to people like them is like trash. At that same instant, he looks to the side with a very serious and imposing expression. Fallen on the ground, the young man with black hair begins to tremble and feel intense pain. Noticing his trembling hand, the sensei notices he has the same symptoms he had. Next, he explains that his body and soul seem to be completely tearing apart. At this moment, he calls the process molting, revealing what's happening to the boy. Seeing the situation, he approaches and says he can no longer ignore what he's witnessing. Right after, he helps him up, promising to protect him until the molting process ends. Extending his hand, he warns that after everything's over, he'll be on his own. Hearing the proposal, the boy stares at him with an intense look full of determination. Kneeling on the ground, he finally accepts the beginning of his painful and great transformation. Shifting to an office at night, he begins to reflect on recent events. Leaning over the desk, he questions whether what he's feeling is some kind of nostalgia, but reading Yanagimoto Ken's medical report, he realizes it's nothing like that. Adjusting his glasses, he smiles, feeling excitement for something completely new in his life. Remembering the transformation, he understands that Ken went through the same molting process as him. However, he still wonders how Ken managed to be fine in that specific situation. He then suspects that Ken may have already reached the next stage of his evolution. Analyzing his investigation board, he begins to connect all the puzzle pieces. Sitting at his desk, he observes all the data he managed to gather about the groups. In the photos, he identifies the awakened ones from Paradise, from Hanrang, and from the Seven Stars Society. With a smile showing his fangs, he admits the situation is getting quite interesting. Then the mysterious K concludes that soon he'll have a new guinea pig for his experiments. Returning to the next day at the university, the sun shines bright in the blue sky. Walking through the field, Ken's friend calls him to talk about last night. While his friend suffers from the hangover, Ken just calls him weak from behind. Opening a bottle, he comments that he didn't expect Ken to accept the position on the committee. With a smile, he says Ken also wanted a place to settle down and stay. Opening the flask, he knows Ken doesn't like seeing his friends being pressured. Smiling, he turns around and says that either way, he's very happy with the decision. But Ken reveals he didn't accept because of the housing or anything like that. Remembering Tachibana, Ken says he accepted because he felt the boy's true feelings. With a subtle smile, he knows the president was being sincere in his words. Remembering his mother, he says he can tell when someone is lying to him. In a memory from the past, a woman tells him she likes people who are authentic. However, drinking his water. Ken's friend says that people like that are very rare. Suddenly, a woman stops in front of them, catching the attention of both young men. Confused by the scene, she doesn't understand what exactly is happening right there in front. Spitting out the water, Ken's friend calls out for Yanagimoto, surprised by the woman's appearance. Waving to Aoi, Ken greets her, leaving his friend totally shocked by the interaction. While Aoi questions what Ken is doing there, he asks if she doesn't think he's a student. Grabbing Ken by the hoodie, his friend complains that he's already making himself at home there. Then Ken ignores the tantrum and asks Miyahara-san what she's doing on campus. With an awkward smile, she explains she came to interview a student about the power organizations. Since the university, being the best in the country, attracts many external influences all the time. Coming to investigate, she wanted to discover how bad the situation really was around there now, but she laments that no one wanted to be interviewed, while Ken is surprised she's alive. Hearing the story, Ken just observes her in silence, processing the difficulty of her situation. Offering help, he asks if she wants him to make things a bit easier for her. Pointing to himself, his friend says he's one of the professors at that university. With an air of superiority, he states he already knows everything that's going on around there. After hearing everything, Aoi finally seems to understand the complexity of the university campus situation. Sitting on a bench, she concludes it's not just a simple cultural exchange. Confirming the suspicion, he explains they're backed by much more powerful organizations behind them, but he reveals there's one unique and mysterious exception among all these groups. Called Fluorescent, they haven't caused problems and don't seem to have anyone's support. Despite not being a strong faction, they're strangely famous and known by everyone. He finishes saying that's all he knows and doesn't recommend interviewing the others. Surprised, she reveals she received permission from the university and questions if she's being clueless. At this moment, a group of students approaches and one of them ends up bumping into her. Ignoring what happened, the student just says he doesn't know what she's talking about. In a hurry, Ken's friend says he still has work to do and says goodbye. Leaving the location, he waves to Ken as if saying he did a good job. Seeing the scene, Aoi asks if he's a kind person, but Ken just answers maybe. Grabbing her bag, she asks what she'll do now, determined to try a bit more. Looking at her, Ken says she can look around campus, but with one condition. He then asks her to never, ever leave his side while they're in there. Misunderstanding, she asks if this means they'll have a date on the university campus. Meanwhile, a white-haired man asks where the reporter who's snooping around is. With a furious look, he wonders if she's someone who perhaps supports the committee. Observing the group, Ken warns Aoi that person is clearly an outsider. Clenching his fist, he considers her basically the same thing as any pest. Perceiving the threat, Ken's gaze becomes serious and much more focused on the opponent. Acting fast, he pulls Aoi behind him, protecting the girl from imminent danger. At that same instant, the white-haired man advances and lands a blow on the bench. Aoi's mouth drops open, completely shocked by the man's display of strength. Looking at the damage, he says the discipline code is a complete chaos. Then he warns that the student committee should just watch everything from afar, but Ken keeps staring at the man without showing any reaction, maintaining his usual calm. With a smile, he asks if Ken perhaps wants to resist against the powerful Paradise group. Ken just responds, asking why he should resist against their group. Getting close to her, the man says he should have said that from the beginning, but Ken explains that resisting is fighting not to have their rights stolen by them. Completing his statement, he warns that either way he won't take anything from her at that moment. Irritated by the response, the man asks what Ken just said. In the name of the committee, he finally declares an official duel against the entire Paradise group. Smiling with confidence, he just tells the guy to resist as much as he can now. On behalf of the committee, he finally declares an official duel against the entire Paradise group. Smiling confidently, he just tells the guy to hold out as long as he can now. Far from there, Tachibana Yori walks down the hallway while reviewing some of his important notes. In his notebook, he analyzes all the information he's gathered about the committee's new advisor. Jotting down the details, he concludes that despite everything, Ken seems to be a pretty reliable man. Even so, he still questions whether he can really trust the new advisor's reliability. Thinking it over, he decides he still can't draw conclusions and needs to wait and see. Suddenly, a colleague runs toward him, shouting that they have a huge problem. Turning around, he listens as the colleague tells him what the new advisor just did. Then he discovers, shocked, that Ken challenged the Paradise group to an official duel. Unable to believe what he heard, he asks what his colleague just said. In the courtyard, a crowd forms around Ken and his opponent to watch. In the middle of everyone, Aoi observes the scene unfolding with a very worried look. The white-haired man then picks up a large piece of wood that was on the ground. Wielding the weapon, he asks Ken what his terms are for the duel. With an eye patch, Ken says that if he wins, Paradise paradise will be completely dissolved. Hearing the demand, the white-haired man gets an expression of pure hatred. With clenched teeth, he says there's a limit to any kind of mockery. But Ken only responds seriously that he's not joking at all. In disbelief, the man doesn't understand how a guy like Ken joined the committee. He then starts to say what would happen if he won the duel against Ken. At that very moment, Tachibana appears shouting for them to wait, trying to stop the fight. He explains that Yanagimoto-senpai entered the university yesterday and doesn't know the duel rules, but Zhang Qiuxia says he doesn't need any prior knowledge about duels. Crossing her arms, she adds that this only shows how uncultured the committee is. Desperate, Tachibana realizes that if the fight happens, not just the committee, but the campus. He then starts blaming himself, thinking it's his fault as committee president. Amid the chaos, he questions whether he should give up his position as the new advisor. While Tachibana is being held back, Ken just watches the whole scene with a very distant look. Turning to the president, he finally prepares to resolve the situation with his own hands. Pushing people aside, Ken heads toward Tachibana to talk with the president. Approaching, he asks if the kid didn't want everything to go back to normal around here. Facing the president, Ken questions whether he really wanted to restore order on campus. He then reminds the guy that he can't manage to do all of this completely alone. With his gaze lowered, Tachibana responds that he knows that better than anyone else. Hearing the response, a slight smile appears on Ken's face. Understanding the situation, taking a step forward, he turns and says, "It's fine to move forward." Meanwhile, Tachibana's colleagues blame him for the new advisor's reckless attitude. Placing their hands on his shoulders, they suggest it's better to remove Ken from his position. Clenching his fist, Tachibana realizes that if he does that, everything will have been in vain. But his colleagues insist, saying he needs to think about saving his own life first. Turning to them, Tachibana says that to achieve something impossible, you need an attitude. With a determined look, he states that they need to bet on something out of the ordinary. Taking the lead, he admits that Ken is a rude person, but he's the bet. On the other side of the courtyard, Ken just watches and awaits the president's decision. Supporting the new advisor, Tachibana tells everyone to trust him at least once. Returning to the duel, Ken pretends he forgot the conversation and asks what they were talking about. Irritated by the provocation, the white-haired man gets a look of pure rage. Gripping the wood, he says he demands exactly the same thing as the advisor. Then he decrees that if he wins, the entire committee will be completely dissolved forever. With a sadistic smile, Zhang Qiuxia tells her henchmen to beat the opponent without mercy. He then jumps and prepares for a top-to-bottom strike with full force. Advancing with the weapon, the white-haired man delivers a powerful blow in his direction. With a precise attack, he tries to hit Ken with the wood right in front of him. At the last second, Ken dodges with a quick movement and escapes the opponent's attack. In disbelief at the speed, the white-haired man doesn't understand how he dodged. Furious, he spins his body and tries to hit Ken with another quick and brutal blow, but Ken dodges once more, escaping a sequence of his fast attacks. With a focused gaze, Ken notices that the Seven-Star Society isn't supporting Paradise. Analyzing the scenario, he suspects that perhaps the Hanrang group is involved in the situation. Observing the group from afar, Ken sees that they're just watching everything happen. With Hanrang just observing, Ken realizes they don't seem interested in interfering in the duel. The fight continues intensely, with Ken just dodging the opponent's strikes in the courtyard. Laughing at the scene, a spectator comments that Ken isn't counterattacking, just always dodging. With arms crossed, another spectator just watches everything in silence, without saying a word. Irritated by the dodging, the white-haired man wonders how long Ken will continue. Screaming in rage, he tells Ken to stop dodging and running around the courtyard. Fed up with the situation, he charges at Ken, but is met with a strike. With a quick movement, Ken lands a direct blow to the opponent's face and takes him down. Fallen on the ground, the white-haired man is completely knocked out with just one blow. Crouching down, Ken picks up the wood that fell on the ground and says he'll borrow it. The crowd is in shock, unable to believe he defeated the opponent with one blow. Even the Paradise members are confused, wondering what just happened there. On the ground, the tip of the wood Ken holds starts to trace a circle. Thoughtful, Ken says the circle is a bit distorted, while an opponent advances. With the wood, Ken lands a spinning strike and stops the man's attack. He then lands a precise blow to the guy's face, showing all his strength. Continuing the movement, he uses the momentum to hurl the opponent far away. The man is thrown to the ground with the impact, completely defeated by Ken's blow. Fallen, he remembers that Zhang Qiuxia ordered him to be beaten without any mercy. With gleaming eyes, Ken approaches, ready to beat him completely as ordered. Terrified on the ground, the man begins to tremble in fear of what will happen. With the wood raised, Ken prepares to attack while the man begs for help. In desperation, he screams for help, catching the attention of all the spectators there. The crowd watches horrified, hearing the cries for help and seeing the brutal scene. With arms crossed, one of the spectators just observes the scene, hearing the screams of "Stop!" The other Paradise members are also shocked by the violence they're witnessing now. Even Tachibana, the committee president, is horrified by the scene before him. While getting beaten, the man says that Ken is just doing what he was told. With the man defeated on the ground, Ken asks if that was enough for her. Stained with blood, Ken stares at Jang Chuxia, who watches everything with a look of hatred. With clenched teeth, she curses Ken, furious at the audacity and humiliation. With the wood, Ken draws a number 1 on the ground, but then erases it. Looking at the marks on the ground, he realizes he still needs to draw number 2. Complaining, he says having to redo everything again is really a hassle for him. Pointing at the group, he starts counting how many opponents still remain for him to defeat. He counts by 2s, leaving all Paradise members completely terrified of him. Turning back, he asks if Tachibana Iori is still there with him in the courtyard. Startled, Tachibana responds yes, and asks what happened for him to call. Holding the wood, Ken asks if it's possible for multiple people to participate in a duel. He completes the question, asking if a one-against-many fight would be possible. Tachibana confirms it's possible, as long as the number of participants is decided by agreement. Too lazy to count all the time, Ken snaps his fingers and prepares to fight. Smiling, he calls everyone to come, saying he'll be the opponent for all of them. Hearing the challenge, the Paradise members prepare to attack all at once. Running together, they advance at high speed toward Ken to start the confrontation. But in just a few seconds, they were all already fallen and defeated on the ground across the courtyard. One of the opponents tries an aerial strike, but Ken blocks it and grabs him. Holding the enemy, Ken uses him as a shield to protect himself from another attack. With a furious look, Ken questions how he dares speak like that to his senpai. Gripping tight, he crushes the man's face with his hand, showing all his strength. In the middle of the chaos, he keeps fighting several opponents at once. With the wooden stick, he prepares to land a direct hit on another enemy. He then delivers a brutal blow to the man's face, who screams in pain. Continuing the sequence, he hits another opponent with a spinning rapid strike. Without stopping, he strikes another enemy with a powerful blow to the chest. Surrounded, he keeps fighting, but 3 opponents manage to grab him from behind. Immobilizing his arms, they shout that they've finally caught their big opponent. Seizing the chance, another enemy advances with a staff to attack Ken while he's trapped. Shouting, the man leaps to deliver a final blow and end the fight. But at the last second, energy explodes from Ken, throwing all the enemies away. With everyone falling back, he says it looks like he'll have to teach them some courtesy. Gripping the staff tightly, he prepares to continue the massacre in the courtyard. With a spinning strike, he takes down several opponents at once with the staff. Facing the enemies, he says his senpai gave them time to play around, but instead of being grateful, they told him to go to hell and cursed at him. Furious at his words, the enemies charge to attack Ken with everything they've got. With a staff strike, he blocks an attack and accuses the opponent of being rude. Striking back, he hits the enemy with a precise blow and throws him away. In the middle of all the fallen opponents, one of them tries a surprise attack from above, but Ken hits him with the tip of the staff, knocking the enemy out mid-air. The man is shocked by Ken's strength, unable to react to the blow he received. Ken reminds him that he told him to go to the other world, which would mean dying. Then he grabs the staff with both hands and breaks it with his strength. With his free hand, he delivers a direct blow to the opponent's face and knocks him down. The man flies backward from the impact, completely defeated by Ken's final blow. Fallen on the ground, Ken says if he can't do that, at least speak politely. Furious, the last 2 enemies charge to attack Ken with everything they have. Running, they shout and go after Ken, who waits for them calmly. With a staff strike, he hits the first enemy, saying they failed. He then hits the second enemy, reminding them of their lack of courtesy and skill. With both defeated, he says they also have no sense of the situation. Smiling, he calls them human trash, showing his contempt for all of them. From afar, Tachibana watches everything in shock, realizing Ken wasn't lying. He understands that Ken really had the power to back up his words and win. Shifting to nighttime, Ken and Tachibana are sitting on the grass, relaxing after everything. Drinking something, they talk about the day's events and the fights on campus. Ken praises Tachibana, saying he's reusable, which leaves him confused. Not understanding, Tachibana asks if he's being recycled like trash, but his friend celebrates. Happy, he says Ken acknowledged him, praising him despite the rude words. Bringing a bag, he says he bought sake to celebrate their victory. Sitting next to Tachibana, he asks if he's ever heard the term dirty beggar. He says if that's the case, He'll have to give him a special lesson. He explains the term is for someone who wandered around and never settled down. Even if they received something, it would be something without meaning or special value to them. But no matter what they received, they would know what's useful and useless. He uses Ken's situation as an example, showing how he felt in the past. Even alone, he was always surrounded by enemies everywhere he went. He experienced murderous intent, fear, and things he truly hated in his life. But Ken was processing those experiences, learning to deal with each one of them. With his eyes shining, he used all of that to become stronger every day. Among the people close to him, there were those who only wanted to take advantage of everything. They were focused on using Ken's power for their own gains and goals, especially the incompetent ones, who were treated like trash and discarded when they weren't useful. Looking at the sky, he concludes that Ken is a man who differentiates others. Suddenly, he takes a blow and is knocked out from behind, falling on the grass. With the enemy down, he finishes telling the story of Yanagimoto Ken. Grabbing the man, Ken tells him to open his eyes for a final conversation. Complaining about the pain, he says he doesn't know how many people he defeated along the way. Amidst the bodies, Ken stands up and demands he tell everything now. With his face bloodied, the man curses at him, not believing what's happening. But Ken just asks if it's really that hard for him to tell what he knows. With a threatening look, he asks if he can't hear him because his ears are clogged. Scared, the man trembles in fear, unable to react to Ken's pressure. Meanwhile, he starts counting the bodies fallen on the ground one by one. Crying in fear, the man watches Ken count, terrified by the scene of horror. He continues the count, showing the pile of bodies he defeated effortlessly. From afar, Zhang Qiuqia wonders why everything ended that way so quickly. With wide eyes, she doesn't understand what kind of monster Ken really is. Stumbling backward, she falls to the ground, completely shocked by her group's defeat. Sitting on the ground, she trembles in fear, staring at the man who destroyed her subordinates. Furious, she accuses the committee, saying all of this is their fault from the beginning. She then accuses Tachibana of recruiting mercenaries, saying Ken is one of them. But Tachibana tells her to stop talking nonsense and says Ken was a student. Clutching her skirt, she says he's also looking down on her with that gaze. With all her fighters defeated, she realizes Paradise is near collapse. She remembers Ken's condition, that Paradise would be disbanded if he won. With a subtle smile, she thinks that if she admits defeat, everything will be over. Turning around, she calls for Wei Zilong, who was watching everything from afar. With red eyes, she orders him to use his sword and enter the fight. She takes responsibility, promising to bear the consequences of her order. Smiling, Wei Zilong simply says, "As you wish," and prepares for combat. With his bloodied staff, Ken draws what appears to be a symbol on the ground. Around him, dozens of suited men lie fallen, all defeated by the young man. Looking up, he faces a new figure who has just arrived at the location silently. Then, Ken turns to the newcomer, who watches him with a smirk. Moving closer, Wei Zilong taunts him about preparing for the battle to come. Responding with a smile, Ken seems unfazed by the dangerous opponent's threat. At that, the swordsman begins to draw the blade of his sword, preparing to attack. Advancing quickly, he attacks Ken, who blocks the strike using his wooden staff. But the swordsman is surprised by the force of the impact, not expecting such resistance. In the next instant, Wei Zilong is thrown back by Ken's superior strength. Even from a distance, he tries to understand how he was overpowered, since he didn't feel anything special. Pointing to his own head, Ken explains that the power gap between them is vast. Right after, he drops the staff, challenging his opponent to a completely unarmed fight. Sensing the provocation, Wei Zilong grows visibly irritated with his adversary's attitude. Then, he points his blade in Ken's direction, accepting the challenge seriously. Advancing with his sword, Wei Zilong charges in with a furious promise strike. Seeking to end the fight, he unleashes a swift, downward attack. With his fist clenched tight, he prepares to attack with his powerful blade. Then, he launches a new horizontal strike toward Ken with his sword. Dodging by a hair, Ken leans back, escaping the cutting attack. Seeing the evasion, the swordsman is surprised by his opponent's speed. Seizing the opening, Ken advances and lands a precise blow to his rival's face. With the impact of the strike, Wei Zilong spits a bit and is thrown backward. Right after, he's hurled away by the force of the attack he just received. But recovering in midair, he prepares a new downward attack. Descending with full force, his sword hits the ground with a devastating impact. After the attack, he lands at a safe distance, observing the result of the strike. Wiping his face, he turns around and is shocked by the scene he sees. Before him, a massive crack opens in the ground, displaying all of his power. But on the other side, Ken simply observes everything with a calm and serious gaze. Taking a step back, Wei Zilong seems to reconsider his previous strategy. Then he assumes a serious stance, preparing to fight with full force. With an intense look, he concentrates to initiate his next devastating attack. In the same instant, he advances at incredible speed, crossing the battlefield. Moving rapidly, he approaches Ken, who remains still without moving. Gripping the sheath, he declares that his opponent won't even be able to see the strike. Right after, he prepares to land a direct blow using the sheath. With a confident smile, he spins his body to attack his adversary with everything. At that, the strike hits the back of Ken's head squarely, but even receiving the attack, Ken remains still, showing no reaction whatsoever. To everyone's surprise, the sword's sheath shatters completely on impact. Changing scenes, a group of people watches everything from afar, completely shocked. Turning to the side, one of them asks what just happened at that moment. Meanwhile, another spectator comments that he couldn't see anything because of the speed. Amid the dust, everyone observes Ken's silhouette, not understanding the situation. Focusing on his gaze, the swordsman's surprise becomes clear with the scene he sees. It turns out Ken simply stopped the sword's blade using only his hand. With his body covered in blood, he holds his rival's weapon without difficulty. Realizing the situation, Wei Zilong is shocked, not understanding how he managed that. With a smile on his face, Ken taunts him about using full force. In the same instant, the swordsman tries to pull his sword back with all his strength, but the blade doesn't move an inch, completely trapped by his opponent's hand. Seeing his desperation, Ken continues with a smirk and stares at him. Then, he appears behind the swordsman in the blink of an eye, completely surprising his rival. Sensing the presence, Wei Zilong turns around, startled by the speed of the movement. Imitating the previous movement, Ken positions himself to attack in the same way. Being very close, the swordsman prepares to defend against an imminent strike. But, instead of attacking, Ken grabs his hand with crushing force. Right after, he grabs the swordsman's neck, lifting his body off the ground. Holding his opponent in the air, Ken demonstrates his total superiority in the fight. With his serious gaze, Ken prepares to finish the confrontation with his opponent. While squeezing his neck, the swordsman begins to lose consciousness little by little. Feeling life draining away, Wei Zilong despairs, unable to break free. At that, Ken takes the sword that his opponent was still holding with his other hand. Taking the weapon for himself, he stares at him and speaks about borrowing it. Right after, he releases his rival's neck, who falls to the ground without strength. Leaving his opponent behind, Ken turns and walks to the center of the location. Stopping near the number he drew, he prepares to test the new weapon. Then he raises the weapon and strikes it with full force on the ground. With the force of the impact, the blade shatters into several pieces instantly. Pieces of the sword are now scattered across the ground, beside the numbers on the floor. Looking at the broken sword, he shows his dissatisfaction with its low quality. Fallen on the ground, the swordsman hears the taunt and just watches him in silence. Analyzing the situation, Ken realizes he's not the true leader of the group. At that, he breaks into a smile, remembering an agreement he made previously. Watching from afar, the group's leader, Zhang Qiuqia, is completely without reaction. Seeing all her men on the ground, she realizes everything went wrong. Meanwhile, other people behind her begin to laugh at her humiliating defeat. With a dark expression, she fills with rage at the unexpected situation. Turning his attention to her, Ken asks if there are still more people to fight. With the provocation, her eyes fill with hatred, and she grinds her teeth. Outside, the calm atmosphere hides the turmoil over Paradise's defeat. In the corners, the crowd of students whispers about the strongest man falling. Then, Zhang Qiuqia realizes there's no one left to fight by her side. Seeing that her fighters can't even walk, despair takes over her. Now alone and surrounded by stairs, she finally understands that her group is finished. In complete despair, she laments how things reached this irreversible point. In that moment, she remembers the sole person responsible for all this totally unexpected destruction. And there stood Ken Yanagamoto, standing and observing the result of his actions. Outside, life on campus continues with a strange and tense normalcy. Analyzing the situation, Tachibana Yori finds the lack of commotion from students odd. Meanwhile, the other factions are already planning how they'll take what's left. Nearby, the common students just watch from afar with evident apprehension. Shortly after, Tachibana Iori approaches Ken, asking for a minute of his attention. Stopping his walk, Ken turns to hear what the president wants to say. Looking at him, Ken simply asks if he's okay with the whole situation. With a smile, Tachibana says he's more worried about overloading him even more. Turning his back, Ken simply starts walking without giving any response. As he passes by her, Ken suddenly stops, leaving Zhang Qiuqia tense. Turning his body toward her, Ken stares at her closely for a moment. Then, He starts provoking her with a question about her group. Surprised by the question, Jang Chuchia is left speechless before the provocation. Not knowing how to respond, she just remains silent with a tense face. Gathering her words, she responds that she never borrowed anyone's power. Analyzing the response, Ken seems to agree with what she just said. After the conversation, he turns and speaks loudly for everyone to hear. He announces that he's taking back his word about ending the Paradise faction. Hearing the declaration, the crowd of students reacts with surprise and disbelief. Next, Ken continues his speech with a direct warning to everyone present. He warns all the hyenas now targeting what's left of Paradise, and also to all those looking down on the committee, warning also anyone who touches the common students and university civilians. With a threatening smile, he'll challenge anyone who disobeys the rules he's established. Hearing this, the crowd of students celebrates their newly won freedom. Emotional, they finally feel safe and shout the committee's name. In the middle of the crowd, someone records the entire celebration with an attentive phone. From afar, Aoi Miyahara perceives the depth of the strategy Ken used. In the same instant, Tachibana understands that the committee finally has a new purpose. Relieved, he thinks about how lucky they are to have Ken on their side. As Ken and Jang Chutsia walk away, he imagines what would happen. Trying to thank him, Jang Chutsia is interrupted before even completing her sentence. With a sinister smile, Ken warns that their conversation isn't over yet. Pointing to the ground, he reveals he's only changed his demand for her. He orders her to kneel and apologize very sincerely. Shocked, she realizes the humiliating meaning behind that specific request. Seeing her hesitation, Ken asks if she'd prefer to fight him again. Reminding her of her subordinate's defeat, Ken leaves her with no choice. Realizing she has no other option, she just agrees to do what was asked. Without hesitating, Jang Kyuxia kneels and asks forgiveness for her actions. Meanwhile, Ken just observes her complete and total humiliation from above. As he turns, he warns her that she was only saved because of Iori. Still on the ground, she nods and says she already knows that. Surprised by the response, Ken stares at her closely with a suspicious look. With a frightened face, she just thanks him for his unexpected and strange mercy. Turning his back, Ken already starts thinking about his next suspicious target. As he walks away, he concludes that the Hwarang faction is the most suspicious. Analyzing the crowd, he notices the group's members watching him from afar. Determined to confront them, he now plans bait to lure them all in. At that moment, a new person approaches and introduces herself as Ishida Nanami. Challenging the committee, she proposes a one-on-one duel between them. Seeing an opportunity, Ken asks what demand she wants to make. Holding the sword, she promises to obey the committee if she's defeated in the duel. With a smile, Ken asks what happens if she manages to win the confrontation. In attack position, she responds that she doesn't care about the final result. With a focused gaze, she states she only came to show her true strength. Advancing rapidly, she prepares to attack Ken with her unsheathed sword. Gripping the sword firmly, she approaches him at extremely high speed now. In a quick movement, she launches a sword strike in his direction. In the last second, Ken dodges the blow, losing only a strand of hair. Looking at the cut hair, he stops and decides to end the fight without retaliating. With her back to him, she just stands in complete silence for a moment. Shocked, she complains that the strike seemed to have hit very hard ground. Playing with the situation, Ken praises her skills as a good hairdresser. Turning to the crowd, he asks if anyone else wants a duel today. Thinking about the fatigue, he realizes what it's like fighting so many awakened at once. But suddenly, a Hwarang member advances and hits Ken with a strike. Supporting his hand on the ground, the Hwarang member slowly gets up. Rising up, he shouts to Ken that the fight isn't over yet. Then, another Hwarang member approaches to help his group partner. Together, they threaten Ken and offer to help him rest. Seeing the scene, Ishida Nanami is surprised by the new opponent's strength. Looking at the two, Ken asks if they're from the Seven Stars Society. Hearing the question, one of them tries to answer but is interrupted by his partner. Then, he denies everything and says he's only there as Hwarang, but Ken just touches his forehead and says it's all over for them. With his eyes glowing, he warns that he was referring to their future. Going back to the late 90s, the whole world was going through changes. As the 20th century was ending, something extraordinary began to manifest. During this time, people with special abilities started appearing among ordinary humans. Emerging from the shadows, these individuals stood out with their unique and mysterious powers. With the ability to control energy, They surpassed any existing human limit. Breaking through an internal barrier, they awakened to a new level of power. This granted them not only heightened senses, but also superhuman physical strength. At the first stage, their physical capabilities increased up to 4 times normal. However, their power wasn't just a simple multiplication of common physical strength. Depending on the situation, a single user was worth dozens or even hundreds of men. But all this absurd power also brought with it a terrible side effect. Over time, their bodies began to deteriorate from a phenomenon. Then, unknown pioneers brought a mysterious drug to solve this new problem. This drug not only prevented the collapse, but also easily created new users. From there, the creation and control of users became possible. Nations and organizations then began working to create their own users. Filling out forms, they searched for individuals with potential to become the strongest. But second stage ones were difficult to create even with national support. Producing these users was a challenge, requiring tremendous effort and resources. With them in the field, success was guaranteed in any mission they received. Coming back to the present, this was the logic everyone knew about the Awakened. Seeing their allies on the ground, their common sense was completely shattered now. In the middle of the crowd, one of them couldn't believe what was happening there. To him, it was absurd that someone could defeat second-stage users so easily. But there was Ken, holding the Hwarang man who had attacked him. Looking at the other one fallen on the ground, Ken continued his interrogation calmly. With his eyes glowing, he asked who had sent them to this place. Even defeated, the man repeated that they were just members of the Hwarang group. Out of patience, Ken advances and strikes the man with a blow to the neck. Seeing the scene, another group member pulls out a weapon to enter the fight. Advancing stealthily, he prepares to launch a surprise attack against Ken, but Ken warns him that no matter the attack, he needs to be ready. Frozen in place, the Hwarang man becomes paralyzed with the warning he received. With his eye glowing, Ken gets irritated with the interruptions that are happening. Then, a crushing pressure hits the Hwarang man in a completely unexpected way. Feeling the danger, he's shocked by the intensity of that terrifying presence. Suffocated by the pressure, he can barely believe that came from a look. Before that giant gaze, he feels like an insect about to be crushed. Unable to bear the pressure, the man falls to the ground screaming for help desperately. Fallen, he realizes that not even the 7 Stars executives were this strong. In that instant, he understands that Ken is far more dangerous than them. With his hand trembling, he finally decides to tell Ken the whole truth. Then, he reveals that those two aren't really from the Hwarang group, as they said. Hearing the betrayal, the man on the ground accuses him of wanting to kill everyone. With a smile, Ken asks if he has any idea of the problem he caused. Warning about the reporter, he reminds him that everything is being filmed by her. Not knowing what to do, the fallen man just stares at the whole situation. Then, he spits on the ground with an expression of pure contained rage. Grinding his teeth, he holds himself back from doing anything stupid at the moment. Suddenly, he grabs his partner and runs away from the location quickly. Seeing the escape, Ken just comments that he doesn't care one bit. At that, he turns to the last Hwarang man who stayed behind. Looking at him, Ken asks if he's going to tell the origin of the two. Without saying anything, Ken just waits for the answer with a very serious look. Then he reveals that he already knows everything about the 7 Stars Society. Stepping on him, Ken says he made the right decision by revealing everything. With a smile, he warns that the man could have become an example. Terrified by the situation, the man finally asks who he really is. With a sinister smile, Ken just asks if he can't guess by himself. Answering the question, he says he's a student who likes freshmen. Meanwhile, the 2 men who fled were running desperately through the university courtyard. Already out of breath, they were trying to get away from that place as fast as possible. Stopping to breathe, one of them wondered what kind of monster that was. At that, the other says they need to regroup with a certain person. Suddenly, a voice emerges saying he had already warned about what would happen. Grabbing the man from behind, Ken asks who is the person they mentioned. With his arm on his neck, he asks if they don't want to leave. Trying to intimidate him, the other man starts making threats against his family. Unfazed, Ken just observes that one of them is very noisy and talks, while the other remains silent all the time without saying a word. Looking at them, Ken suggests what would happen if he combined the mouths. Then he grabs the man's face forcefully to begin his punishment. Next, he threatens to crush both into just one forever. Forcing his mouth, Ken starts breaking it with his own hands. Terrified, the Hwarang man hears the sound of his partner being punished. On the ground, only the man's bloodied teeth remained after that action. Looking at his own hand, Ken wonders if that wasn't perfect. Taking a few steps, he starts walking toward the last remaining man. Getting closer, he asks if the man has any better idea now. In panic, the man desperately begs him not to come any closer. Around campus, students were whispering about the situation and what would happen next. At that, They discover that the council representative went after the guys who fled. Suddenly, a mysterious woman appears with a very strange smile on her face. Looking around, she asks if Yanagimoto wasn't in that place anymore. Surprised by the appearance, Aoi recognizes the representative and is left not understanding anything. With a smile, the woman says she came to invite him for a special tea. Laughing awkwardly, Aoi comments that she doesn't think Yanagimoto likes tea, but the woman just says she knows him very well since he was a child. After that incident, the atmosphere at the university changed drastically for all the students. With this, the student council's morale increased significantly among the other students. Meanwhile, the Paradise faction entered an almost total collapse from within. Seeing many members leave, the organization now only existed in name alone. Now, the Hwarang group was under the direct supervision of the student council. With the new rules, its members were forced to obey the new orders. Even with the defeat, her group became a council organization. For her coverage, Aoi Miyahara received a very important journalism award. Thus, she became a famous reporter recognized by all sides. Up on the terrace, Ken observed the university's movements with complete attention. Thinking about the next steps, he realized that the Seven Stars Society had made a move. In the middle of the field, a student is thrown far by a quick strike. To move alone, he needed to stabilize the situation inside the university first. Fighting with determination, Ishida faces several opponents at the same time without retreating. Blocking the attack, she defends herself from the strike coming from above her. Defending herself from the blow, Ishida Nanami blocks the attack with her sword blade. Gripping the handle tightly, she prepares to counter the blow received. Then, she leaps and hits the opponent with a strike that throws him. Advancing across the field, she runs to the next target without losing a second. With a focused gaze, she prepares her next attack against another one of the opponents. In a quick movement, she dodges and hits the man with a strike. Right after, she spins her body and continues to fight against all of them. Her eyes shine intensely, showing her total concentration in the middle of the difficult combat. Holding the sword firmly, she prepares to continue her attack. But suddenly, Ken appears from behind and grabs her shoulder with force. Reprimanding the attitude, he warns her not to unsheath her sword recklessly. Without questioning the order, she just apologizes for her impulsive and excessive behavior. Seeing the order established, Ken realizes there won't be any more problems for now. Observing the men on the ground, he praises her strength and potential. On the field, all the opponents were fallen and defeated by her great skill. With a smile, she admits that she was once arrogant because of her strength. Remembering the calamity, she tells him she heard about a key person for the future. Confused, Ken just listens to her story without understanding what she wants. Suddenly, the woman who was watching him approaches and interrupts their conversation. Sighing, Ken just stares at her with a look of exhaustion and total distrust. With a smile, she invites him to have some tea and chat a bit. Scene change, the two are now sitting in a completely empty cafeteria. Nervous, Ken picks up the cup without really wanting to meet with that mysterious person. Complaining about the difficulty, she says he always runs away when she approaches. Without patience, Ken just looks away and ignores the complaint she made. Tired of games, he asks directly what she wants with him now. With a smile, she says she just wanted to chat with him a bit. To her, Ken is the hero who saved the entire university from recent problems. Picking up the cup, she continues her speech with a very serene expression on her face. Looking at him, she says many things come to her mind when she sees him. Like flowers blooming in spring, she describes a nostalgic feeling, and also the sound of cicadas that always announce summer's arrival, just like the trees that change color under the autumn sky, or the first snow of winter that accumulates very slowly. To her, all this brings a very strong and inexplicable feeling of longing. It's as if the threads of destiny have been interconnected between them for a long time. Without saying a word, Ken just listens to her speech in total silence. Drinking the tea, he asks her to stop saying random things. However, he feels a strange similarity with that person in front of him. The tea, for example, seemed strangely familiar to his personal and unique taste. It had a nostalgic feeling, as if it were something from his hometown. But at the same time, he felt a very great strangeness in all that familiarity. Then, she asks if the tea served was to his liking. With a smile, she says she doesn't believe that's really the case. With a smile, he says she seems to know a lot about his life. With a mysterious look, she just responds with a simple and short maybe. Irritated, he says he's not in the mood for jokes and insinuations now. Standing up from the table, she invites him to come and go whenever he wants. Picking up the cup, she invites him to use the place whenever he needs. She reveals that the cafe is the perfect place for quieter conversations. Looking around, Ken wonders how no one noticed their presence there. Suddenly, he notices something strange in the air and becomes very suspicious. Despite her popularity, no one was looking in the direction of their table. It was as if they were invisible to all the people passing by. Laughing, She reveals it's a small adjustment she made to the place. Without a guide, the cafe becomes as discreet as a simple tree. To those outside, the cafe looks like just a common and empty building. Then he realizes she's not an ordinary person like the others. With a smile, he now doubted whether she was even human. Scene change. An empty office is shown with no one around now. Analyzing a report, a man receives important news about the local university. Being the vice director of the committee, he discovers about Paradise's fall. Confirming the information, his subordinate says the factions lost their former influence. Seated, the director asks which faction was responsible for this major change. Shocked, he discovers that everything was done by a single very powerful man. On the map, he wonders if America intervened in the situation somehow. On the map, 3 Class 1 and 2 targets are shown prominently, but his subordinate says that, on the contrary, they also seem quite confused. Standing up from the chair, the director realizes that a new powerful awakened one has appeared. Opening the door, the director prepares to leave the room immediately. He orders them to prepare a car so he can go to the location. Suddenly, Ayana Koji appears and questions his decision to get involved in this. Arms crossed, he advises him to avoid rash and thoughtless actions. But the director responds that this matter requires someone with authority to resolve it. Ayana Koji says he prioritizes soldiers who follow orders above anything else. Taking a step forward, Ayana Koji approaches and provokes him with a personal question. Staring at the director up close, he asks if he still thinks about his failure. Irritated by the provocation, the director demands he watch his words now. At that moment, another man appears to try to calm the situation between them. Suddenly, the director hits the man with an unexpected punch to the face. Grabbing the man by the neck, he says he's going to educate him about the awakened. He explains that they are strategic weapons and one-man armies. With an irritated look, he asks what happens if they don't communicate. On the phone, the director says that deep down, they're still just human. On the phone, Ken receives a call and a proposal from the committee's vice director. With sincerity, he says they can reach an agreement with any human. Receiving the call, Ken asks to use the location immediately for a meeting. Hearing the request, the woman stands up and decides to leave for a while. Sighing, he realizes he's been dragged into yet another very problematic matter. With a smile, she says that trials are part of a hero's journey. Outside, the director approaches without Ken noticing his presence. Entering the room, Ken meets with the director for the scheduled meeting. Sitting at the table, Ken goes straight to the point without wasting any more time. Then he asks what the committee's vice director wants with him now. Leaning on the table, the director says he's not here to propose anything. He reveals he's only seeking a cooperative relationship in cases of national emergency. With a serious look, Ken asks if he wants him to be a dog. Remembering the past, he reveals he was used as an experiment in America. With a distant gaze, he recalls the hardships he faced for many years. When he returned, he received news of his family's death and disappearance. Aki's message informed him that his uncles died and his cousin disappeared. Pointing at him, Ken says the country never helped him in those moments. To him, the contract was just a way to use his power to keep tabs on him. Without hesitation, he asks if there's any reason to cooperate with the government, but the director reveals they share the same enemies in common now. With his hands on the table, he asks Ken to consider the government's intentions. Not caring, Ken warns he's willing to break the law for this, but the director responds that their job is to legalize his actions. Leaning forward, he decides to ask one final question to the director there. Arms crossed, he asks what would happen if he became a threat. Without hesitation, the director responds they would stop him at any necessary cost. With glowing eyes, Ken just stares at him with a very defiant look. Then he simply asks if they could really stop him somehow. With a tense look, the director recognizes the truth in those defiant words of his. Suffocated by the pressure, he feels as if he's being held down by a force. The pressure was stronger than any other awakened he knew. Clenching his fist, he prepares to respond to the challenge made by Ken. With red eyes, he says what can be done is different. In a vision, the two stare at each other with their energies clashing intensely. With a smile, Ken says he's not suited for politics. Leaning on the table, he says the director can't lie or flatter. Sighing, the director admits he's causing problems because of his actions. With a smile, Ken says he agrees to the deal because of that attitude. Standing up, the director finally accepts the cooperation proposal between the two of them. Extending his hand, he makes himself available for whatever Ken needs. Shaking hands, they finally seal the cooperation agreement between the two. On the phone, Ken receives information about Kyoko's possible whereabouts at the hospital. The message on the cell phone indicated the hospital's location for him to go. With a sweaty look, the director asks to be contacted as soon as he finds them. Turning his back, he prepares to leave the room and go. At the door, he says goodbye and warns they'll be meeting frequently now. With a wave, Ken just nods and says goodbye to the director. Suddenly, his cell phone rings in his pocket, and he picks it up to answer. On the screen, Miyahara's name appears as the person calling. Answering the call, he hears a complaint from the other end of the phone line. She thanks him for helping her win the journalism award. Then, she asks if they can meet at that exact moment of the call. With a smile, she celebrates the positive response and hangs up the phone quickly. In the office, the man who got beaten apologizes for bringing in a mercenary, but Ayanokoji says they have a new plan to deal with the situation. With a skeptical look, he questions if it's possible to weaken Ken. With a smile, he recalls that last time, second stage users, but with a smile, he reveals the names of the newly hired hunters. Remembering the past, they already fought against Ken when he was a mercenary. Being professionals, they have a lot of experience fighting and hunting targets like Ken. Questioning the mission, one of them thinks it's a waste to just attack and run now, but the other responds they're only there to fulfill their mission. Adjusting the equipment, he orders all residents to be evacuated from the area. Finding it all boring, the other sees a chance to finally defeat Yasha. While preparing his weapon, he remembers an old saying from the eastern side. With the rifle in his hand, he says, "You don't beat someone who enjoys it." That's why he positions himself and carefully aims at his target in the distance. Looking through the scope, he says they need to make the most of this moment. Suddenly, a voice calls out Yanagimoto's name in the middle of the empty street. Waving, Aoi Miyahara apologizes for making him wait for her there. Surprised, the sniper wonders if there were still residents left in the previously evacuated area. Seeing the reporter, the other mercenary says she could be a problem. With a cold stare, he orders her to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Preparing the rifle, the sniper gets ready to shoot in the reporter's direction. Suddenly, Ken steps in front of her and takes the hit in her place. With gleaming eyes, he shields her from the attack coming from afar. Shocked, Aoi just stares at him without understanding what had happened there. Closing his hand, he grabs the projectile that was fired at him. With his hand bleeding, he holds the projectile with great force and determination. Then, he lets it drop to the ground with a very metallic sound. Looking at his hand, he realizes these weren't ordinary gun projectiles. Worried, Aoi asks if he's okay after being hit. Turning his back, he just asks her to wait there for a moment. Warning he'll be right back, he prepares to go after the shooters now. Recognizing the sniper, he runs toward the location where the shot came from. Using his speed, he advances quickly through the trees to find his target. Hidden in the bushes, he finally finds the sniper who attacked him from afar. With a focused look, he warns him that he found him in the middle of the forest. Taking a step, Ken advances toward him with great anger and determination. Jumping from the building, he descends toward the sniper at extremely high speed now. In the air, he dodges the attacks that are launched at him rapidly. With a kick, he gets rid of the explosives that were thrown at him. Hidden in the brush, the other mercenary observes the fight from afar with attention. Advancing with everything, Ken shouts that this method won't work on him there. With gleaming eyes, he prepares to attack the sniper with force. Suddenly, the other mercenary appears and attacks him up close with a strike. With a quick movement, he dodges and grabs his opponent's arm. With a smile, he says it's hard to pet a cat that is skittish. He explains that with this approach, the cat just gets scared and runs away, or else it simply bites to defend itself from any surprise and unexpected attack. At that moment, the sniper tries to hit him with a strike from behind, but Ken appears at his side and hits him with a quick blow. Leaving a cut on his face, he stares at him with great anger now. Advancing forward, he hits him, saying he only shows up when he's sure. Then, he grabs him to ensure he doesn't flee from the fight again. With gleaming eyes, he decides to end it all before it gets more complicated. But the sniper asks for time, begging him to stop the attack now. With a desperate shout, he interrupts the fight and asks for a small pause. Then, the sniper surrenders and proposes a deal to save his life. He says the information he has is worth hearing. With a serious look, Ken just tells him to be quick and speak up. With a smile, the sniper asks if he thought he would come alone. Right then, a new man appears and reveals he came to deal with him. Shocked by the appearance, Ken just stares at the new man in front of him. In the middle of the clearing, the other mercenary was lying defeated on the ground. Far from there, Aoi Miyahara was walking back to her house peacefully alone. Passing through a street, she crosses through a gate to reach her destination. Suddenly, she stops and wonders what was happening in that place. Turning around, she realizes a projectile came flying in her direction out of nowhere. Right then, a hand grabs her from behind and pulls her away from there. With the impact, She's thrown to the ground with great force and violence. Then, the person grabs her and says she's just a person. Holding her hair, he blames her for being greedy and meddling. Not understanding, Aoi asks what he means by that strange word. With a knife, he reveals she was following him for a story. With the knife at her neck, he prepares to end her life. Terrified, Aoi tries to buy time and distract him somehow to escape. Right then, she remembers the Seven Stars Society and has a brilliant idea. With a bluff, she accuses him of bringing his personal feelings into this. Shocked, he wonders how a simple reporter knew that secret information. Realizing the tactic, he prepares to attack her without falling for her talk. Suddenly, he stops and realizes his body won't move anymore. Paralyzed, he wonders if this was Ken Yanagimamoto's special ability. Being watched, he feels a crushing pressure coming from a giant golden eye. In his mind, he feels his eye being pierced by an invisible force. Screaming, he says he thought there would be no countermeasure for this power. Then, he releases his energy and manages to free himself from the paralysis. With the impact, Aoi is thrown far away by the force of the energy released. At that moment, Ken appears from behind and catches her before she falls. With gleaming eyes, he prepares to fight his opponent now. Advancing at high speed, he runs toward Ken to attack him directly. The two clash in a strike that creates a huge shockwave. Right then, Ken stares at him and asks why he's so pale now. Then, he warns him that he's going to put him to sleep next to his mother. Hearing the threat, his eye reveals all his contained fury. Controlling his anger, Scavenger clenches his fist hard, wanting to end it all right there. Despite the urge, he backs off since he's not in his best physical condition at the moment. Grabbing Ken's arm, he confirms he's held up his end of the deal by weakening the target. Then he turns and leaves, promising that next time, there'll be no escape. Relieved, Ken watches the mercenary leave, thinking he got lucky the fight didn't continue. Seeing Aoi frightened, he quickly approaches to make sure she's safe and sound. At that instant, he notices Snowcat at the top of the stairs, watching everything with an analytical gaze. Analyzing the scene, the sniper realizes Ken's power has increased a lot since their last encounter. With a dark smile, Ken thinks he would have died if not for the deal they made. Keeping his word, Snowcat turns to leave, leaving the two behind, but Ken stares at him with a serious look, leaving a silent warning in the air. Raising his hands in a peace sign, Snowcat assures he's loyal to his contracts. He then points to his rifle, informing that the mission's over anyway. With a smile, he says he won't take any more jobs against Ken if he wants to live longer. But before leaving, Scavenger appears with one last piece of information as a courtesy gesture. Warning about the danger, Scavenger reveals that Yugo Mizukami will come to deal with Ken personally. Joking with Aoi, Snowcat says goodbye and offers help if she needs anything in the future. Leaving a contact with her, he approaches and offers a discount for the shot from before. Indignant, Aoi stares at the mercenary, thinking about how shameless he is after everything. Noticing her reaction, Snowcat comments that she's really not on their side. Confused by the comment, Aoi simply doesn't understand what that meant. Explaining his philosophy, he says they don't have allies or enemies, only power. Changing his tone, he poses in a funny way, bragging about being totally incomparable. Then he says goodbye and leaps away, asking that they don't meet again. Looking at the paper in her hand, Aoi can't understand what kind of person he was. Seeing her confusion, Ken gets Aoi's attention with a very serious tone. With a heavy look, he says they shouldn't see each other anymore for safety. Totally surprised, Aoi can't understand the reason for that sudden decision from him. Turning her face, she asks if he thinks she only looks for him for a story. Next, she stares at him and vehemently denies it, shouting about her true intentions. Crumpling the paper, she explains that her interest isn't just recording dramatic moments. She then reminds him, saying that the way he faces danger inspires courage. Recalling a story, she says she's seen many people give up and isolate themselves along the way. Hearing her words, Ken has nothing to say at that exact moment. Then he places his hand on her shoulder, saying he knows she's not like that. Touching her shoulder, he claims to be strong enough to survive any danger, but a vision of his family reminds him that in the end, he always ends up alone. With a sad look, he says he doesn't want to feel that abandonment again. Hearing this, she asks if he's pushing her away because he thinks she's weak. Clenching his fist, he agrees that having someone weak around can be a burden. Right after, she counters that without support, even the strongest can break someday. Holding his arm, she reinforces that she's seen this happen many times at work. In silence, he just listens to her say that strength or weakness don't matter that much. Suddenly, Aoi feels a stab of pain in her shoulder and winces a little. Seeing her pain, he lowers his head and pleads for her to leave. With a determined expression, she ends the conversation, standing firm in her final position. Turning to leave, She promises she'll get in touch with him again. At that, she looks back with a smile and asks if he'll still answer the call. In silence, Ken just watches her, processing everything with a very serious look. Maintaining his gaze, he remains thoughtful, pondering the young reporter's fearless attitude. Giving one last smile, she turns away for good, confident she's done her part. Right after, Aoi goes on her way alone, walking down the street at dusk without looking back. Watching her walk away, Ken finally lets out a long sigh, seeming much more tired. At that same instant, his cell phone suddenly starts ringing inside his pocket. Taking out the device, he sees the call is coming from someone at the college. Answering curtly, he asks what the person wants with him now. On the other side, Otsuka informs he's found the hospital where Kuniyama Kyoko was admitted. Noticing something strange, Ken questions why he used the past tense. Then Otsuka reveals she was removed from there and her whereabouts are unknown. Gritting his teeth in anger, Ken orders them to send backup to his location immediately. Worried, Otsuka asks Ken to wait, warning that it's too dangerous for him to act alone. But Ken responds coldly, saying what he does is his problem alone. With nothing to say, Otsuka agrees with the decision and quickly hangs up the phone. Running his hand through his hair, Ken gets frustrated, thinking about Aki's mother now. Gripping the contact hard, he gets irritated about having to ask for help again. Changing scenes, Kuniyama Aki tries to make a call with the phone she recovered. When trying to call, she hears the message that the number is unavailable at the moment. Frustrated, she looks at the phone, lamenting that she can't get through just when she needed to. Thinking about the situation, she tries to call Ken, wondering where he could be. But in the end, she gives up on the call, concluding that's the best decision. Believing it's right, she decides she needs to protect Mei and also save Ken. Remembering her struggle, she trembles a little, thinking about all the effort she made. Gripping the phone hard, she fills with a much darker determination. In a burst of rage, she screams, questioning the usefulness of those who don't help her. At that exact moment, the doorknob starts to turn, indicating a visitor. Hearing the noise, Aki turns around startled, looking toward the bedroom door. With a violent kick, the door is broken down and flies into the room. Right after, a man's body is thrown forcefully against the floor. Looking at the fallen man, Aki immediately recognizes him as Yugo Mizukami. Then he raises his face with a look of pure rage and stares at her. Screaming in pain, Aki is thrown violently to the ground by a brutal strike. Looking down at her, Yugo accuses her of secretly leaking information to the Yanagamoto. With rage, he grabs her hair forcefully, yanking her head back. Even in pain, she screams back that his accusations are just speculation. Hearing her response, he falls silent for a moment, processing everything. Then he lands a hard blow to her face, snapping her head to the side. Adjusting his collar, he complains about all the work he put in to rebuild the organization. Sitting on the couch, he continues, saying he got here by trusting only his instincts. Before her, he affirms with complete certainty that his judgment is absolutely absolute. With a dark look, he reinforces that this isn't speculation, but pure conviction. Slowly rising, she stares back at him with a completely defiant and cold posture. At that, she provokes him, saying his instincts aren't as good as he thinks. Irritated by her audacity, he simply questions if she's going to keep talking. Gritting his teeth, he laments not having the goods that Yanagimoto Mei managed to get. Grabbing his phone, he promises he'll make sure she never underestimates him again. Hearing his call, Aki becomes completely paralyzed. No reaction to the order given. Speaking on the phone, Yugo coldly orders them to cut off one of her mother's hands. With eyes wide in horror, she understands the cruelty about to happen. Desperate, she stands and screams that he had promised to spare her mother's life. Ignoring her despair, he calmly lights a cigarette without even looking at her face. While smoking, he responds that he only promised to spare her life, nothing more than that. Screaming back, she accuses him of just twisting the words of their agreement. With a sadistic smile, he threatens to take the other hand if she keeps complaining. Terrified by the threat, tears stream from her eyes as she stares at him hopelessly. Completely defeated and trembling, she lowers her head, no strength left to keep arguing. Then she kneels on the floor, begging him to stop and accept punishing her instead. With a victorious smile, Yugo demands that she call herself completely useless trash. Looking at her, he further demands that she say every word with sincerity. Before him, she begins to speak, accepting the humiliation to save her mother. Crying from humiliation, she finally says the words, feeling the full weight of her choice. Hearing the humiliation, Yugo agrees with her statement as a tear falls to the ground. Then he approaches and steps near her, saying everyone would be better off without her. Adjusting his collar, he says he'll show a little mercy since she obeyed. Turning to his men, he gives a new order to correct the previous plan. With a cruel smile, he tells them to take a finger instead of the whole hand. Switching to Hermes' base, a call from Ken Yanagimoto appears on the screen. Inside his hideout, the hooded informant notices the call received on his system. Answering the call, he projects a hologram of Ken and asks what he wants. On the other end, Ken asks if he remembers the woman he mentioned before. With a smile, Hermes confirms and asks Ken to find Kuniyama Aki's mother. Mentioning Ken's power, he gets excited and asks what the payment will be this time. Then Ken simply promises a reward worthy of the work if he can get the location. Leaning forward, Hermes asks for a promise, warning not to try to trick him again. Guaranteeing his word, Ken makes Hermes start the search immediately on his holographic map. Shortly after, Ken's phone vibrates, indicating a new message has arrived. Looking at the message on his phone, Ken confirms that her location is very close. Then, with a determined look, he promises to settle everything with Mizukami once and for all. Switching to the location, the scene shows a completely abandoned and very suspicious industrial area. Guarding the entrance, 2 armed thugs stay on alert, preventing anyone from passing. Inside, a man begs for help, while the torturer prepares for work. Sighing with exhaustion, he simply grabs a huge cleaver to continue the dirty work. Pulling his mask, the man complains about the job, clearly irritated with the whole situation. At that, another thug appears at the door, observing the victim tied in the sack nearby. Giving the order, he tells the torturer to shut up the screaming victim. Then the thug approaches another hostage, preparing to use his knife. Seeing the man approach, the victim trembles in fear and begs for their life. But the torturer orders them to discard her elsewhere after everything is resolved. Hearing a noise, he seems to have an idea about what to do next. Picking up a severed finger, he carefully removes the gold ring that was there. Right after, he holds the finger, thinking the plan is going perfectly well. Grumbling in frustration, the torturer turns around hearing a noise from the door. At that moment, a thug brings Aki's mother, tied and gagged in a chair. Approaching her, he begins to speak with a clear tone of mockery and sarcasm. Touching her shoulder with his dirty hand, he asks if she's tired of waiting. With a cruel smile, he promises everything will be very quick if she stays quiet. Terrified by the threat, she begins to tremble and struggle in the chair. Grabbing her hair forcefully, he immobilizes her to continue with his work, but he releases her, commenting that she was lucky not to have the same fate. Hearing that, her terror increases, imagining what happened to the other prisoners. Feigning confusion, he wonders which body part he should start cutting now. At that, the thug interrupts him, informing that the order was to take just 1 finger. Complaining about the order, he slams the cleaver near her hand, finding the punishment light. Looking at her, he says her daughter just saved her life, but he adds that losing a finger wouldn't be the end of the world for her. Then he raises the dirty cleaver, preparing to deliver the final and precise blow. With a sadistic smile, he asks her to stay still and lands the precise strike. At a formal dinner, Kronos calmly brings a piece of meat to his mouth. Wiping his mouth, he informs that Uetsu said he would take care of Yamamoto personally. At that, Zeus confirms he seems to have found a way to finally defeat him. Kronos then comments that the man is good at what he does, but a troublemaker. Hearing this, Zeus asks if Yamamoto is really as dangerous as everyone says. Tapping his knife on the table, Kronos prepares to tell an old story about him. He explains that under his leadership, the Society of Seven has a solid foundation, but in the past, the organization was completely destroyed and in a state of ruins. Remembering the scene, he reveals it was all caused by a single man alone. Going back in time, several members of the organization were down and totally defeated on the floor. In the middle of them all, one of the leaders was on the ground, unable to react. Standing over the man, Ken says he finished off Mizukami's group easily. With a sadistic smile, he wonders how he should deal with their leader. Then, he lifts him by the throat against the wall of an empty corridor. Looking back, he asks which floor they're on, planning his next move. Smiling cruelly, he threatens to throw him to test all the limits of his body. In the victim's gaze, pure terror reflected the image of his cruel aggressor. Returning to the present, Zeus comments that even a demon would have been much kinder. Hearing the account, Kronos loses his appetite and drops his utensils on the table. Standing up next, he orders someone to be sent to observe everything from afar. On the plate, the barely touched meat showed the impact of the story he told. Then he gives a warning, saying not to approach him recklessly. Back at the warehouse, the entrance guards had already been completely neutralized by him. Meanwhile, the torturer was already defeated, and without any reaction on the floor. Standing in the center, Ken faces the remaining thugs, who are protecting Aki's mother. Pointing at them, he makes it clear that his patience has finally reached its end. On the floor, the torturer begs Ken to end it all at once. Preparing for the attack, two thugs approach with their weapons in hand now, but his cold gaze showed not an ounce of hesitation or any fear. Scared by his presence, the men just stare, protecting the hostage in the chair. Taking the initiative, one of the thugs advances with a knife to attack first, but Ken dodges and blocks the strike using a baton he grabbed from the floor. With a quick movement, he grabs and breaks the man's wrist without hesitating. The force of the impact ends up breaking the baton in two pieces in his hand. Taking the chance, he grabs the knife from the fallen thug to continue the fight. Then he uses the weapon to hit the next enemy with a precise strike. Seeing the scene, the other man turns around scared, not understanding his speed. In an instant, Ken finishes the second thug with a quick and totally lethal movement, right after he drops the man's lifeless body on the warehouse floor. In a short time, the other men are defeated and lie scattered around the place. In desperation, the torturer yells for an armed thug to drop the weapon immediately. With only a few remaining, they prepare as one of them draws a new weapon. Ignoring the warning, the man points the gun in his direction with great anger. But suddenly, he realizes the target has disappeared from his sight completely. Appearing behind him, Ken surprises him with a quick and totally unexpected strike. In the blink of an eye, the remaining thugs are all neutralized by a sequence of blows. Fallen on the floor, the torturer now stares at his shadow, feeling true fear. Ken approaches in silence, staring at the last enemy standing with a look. With a desperate smile, the man tries his luck and begs to be released. But Ken just stares back at him, showing not an ounce of any emotion. Losing his cool, he screams with all his might, calling Ken a monster. In response, Ken lands a devastating blow directly to the man's face without mercy. Leaving the man on the ground, Ken stands still, observing the result of his attack. Almost unconscious, the torturer still manages to ask for help one last time from him. Raising his foot, Ken replies that he's asking for too much after everything he's done. Then he finishes the man off with a series of violent blows without stopping for anything. Seeing the whole scene, Aki's mother trembles with fear in the wooden chair. Turning her face, she closes her eyes, unable to continue watching the brutal violence. Shortly after, she slowly opens her eyes upon noticing that the noise had finally stopped. With a gentle smile, Ken apologizes to her for taking so long to arrive. Back at the hideout, Yugo Mizukami smokes a cigarette in a very calm and relaxed manner. Then he tells Aki to be grateful that it all ended with just one finger. Staring at him with hatred, she curses him for all his cruelty and sadism, but Yugo just gives a side smile, enjoying the situation very much. He puts out the cigarette on her head, saying that trash is good for nothing. Right after, he threatens her, saying he might take another finger depending on his mood. At that moment, his cell phone vibrates, and he sees the job has been completed. He answers the call with a smile, ready to give the next cruel order. But his expression changes to pure shock upon hearing a familiar voice on the other end. It was Ken, greeting his old enemy after a long time without speaking. Provoking Mizukami, he asks if his pathetic life has been very fun lately. Meanwhile, the scene shows the result of Ken's invasion of the industrial warehouse. On the phone, he explains he killed all the men who were under his command. He still mocks, saying that Yugo doesn't really care about his subordinates. Then Ken tells him to stay alive until he arrives for the settling of scores. With a look of hatred, he promises he'll end it all with his bare hands. Remembering the past, his hand crushes the delicate hair ribbon with pure force. Meanwhile, Kuniyama Aki is struck by a blow and falls to the ground completely defenseless. Watching the scene, Yugo Mizukami gives a direct order to one of his henchmen there. With his face full of hatred, he tells them to use everything they had stored in the factory. Turning to his subordinate, he orders them to prepare the masks because they're leaving soon. Hearing the order, the henchman is terrified by the terrible mission he just received, but Yugo just stares at him with a deadly look, questioning if he has any problem. Without hesitation, the man says he'll notify everyone immediately about the new plan. Then, he also orders his men to take Kuniyama Aki along with them there. Hearing her fate, her face fills with dread knowing what will happen. Switching to a warehouse, the scene shows the place where another woman is being held. Inside, Ken Yanagamoto finally finds her and begins untying her hands in a hurry. With his face injured, he asks if she's hurt after all this time imprisoned. Ignoring the question, the woman grabs his bloodied hand with great force and desperation. Then she looks at him and begs him to save young Aki too. Hearing the desperate plea, Ken falls silent for a brief and tense moment. Then, he holds her hands more firmly, interlacing his fingers securely. With a gentle smile, he asks her not to worry, because he'll fix everything. Soon after, he helps her stand up and guides her out of the room. As they walk, he He reflects on the choice between his revenge and rescuing Aki. Switching to the factory, he wonders which of the two paths he should really follow forward. At the same instant, Yugo's henchman panics upon realizing the terrible situation. Then, another team member arrives and confronts the completely desperate man who's there. Confused by the arrival, he stops shouting and looks up without understanding anything. But the other man points to some barrels, questioning if they know what's inside. With a frightening smile, he warns that the enemies are already coming here. Hearing this, the henchman steps back, becoming completely paralyzed by pure fear. Feeling cornered, he slams the table and accepts that everything is finally over for him. Cutting to the outside, Ken walks through the courtyard full of fallen bodies. Even injured, he advances and confirms that he's already dealt with the weaker enemies of the place. With a determined look, he now just needs to wait for the boss to finally show his face. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes through the warehouse, completely drawing his attention there. Carefully, he peeks through a crack in the door to see what's happening. Observing the place, he notices a strange smoke spreading through the air rapidly. At the same instant, Ken is hit by a surprise blow coming from his back. Looking to the side, the mysterious smoke begins pouring out of one of the barrels there. Fallen on the ground, he realizes the place looks like an illegal drug factory. Amid the smoke, he spots a strange silhouette approaching in the dark corridor. Suddenly, one of the henchmen advances in his direction with superhuman speed. The man tries to hit him with a blow, but Ken reacts in time to defend himself. With a quick movement, he manages to grab the enemy's arm and stop the attack. Taking advantage of the moment, Ken throws him over his shoulder with great force to the ground. But even with the enemy down, he wonders what the hell is happening now. Then, the henchman gets up with an insane smile and red eyes glowing intensely. Seeing that, Ken realizes they injected an unstable nectar into their own body. With his body transforming, the henchman shows his new claws for combat. On the ground, tools and drugs reveal the illegal activities that happened in the abandoned place. Screaming with fury, he charges at Ken with the intention to attack. As the enemy approaches, Ken prepares his defense while maintaining his position firmly. Activating his powers, his eyes glow and he prepares a strike with his fist clenched. With a quick movement, he hits the enemy's body with a devastating punch. Piercing through the henchman, his strike completely breaks the enemy's defense with total force. After the fight, Ken stands in front of the body fallen on the ground. Looking at the barrels, he still tries to understand where all that strange smoke comes from. With a serious look, he questions if all those sacrifices were really necessary there. Then, his eyes glow intensely as he senses a new presence approaching the place. As he walks, he wonders what that was and the origin of the red smoke. Sensing the danger, he decides he needs to get out of there as fast as he can. From the outside, Yugo Mizukami arrives with an army of heavily armed men. With a cruel smile, he finally faces his target after all this time. Walking forward, he mocks that he was worried about the little gift he sent before. With a deadly look, Ken just listens to the provocation from his greatest enemy. Showing a pill, he explains it can push anyone beyond their limits, but he reveals that the ones he used before were just much weaker versions. Hearing the revelation, Ken just closes his fist with great force and silence. Ignoring his rage, Yugo says he can help find that Kanade Yamamoto. With his face full of hatred, he can't stand hearing so much nonsense anymore. Then, Yugo reveals that his sister is essential to create the perfect nectar. Hearing about his sister, Ken's expression changes completely and becomes darker. That's why he says he went to find his parents, but they didn't say anything. Remembering the search, Yugo tells how the girl hid very well from them that night. Then, he reveals that not even his information network found clues about her whereabouts. Faced with this fact, he now admits he should have done something much worse before. With a cruel smile, he shouts that he should have tortured his parents more. Hearing the confession, Ken's rage explodes and takes over his face. With a subtle smile, Ken says he's happy with Yugo's confession. Then, Yugo gets confused, because he was actually a bit worried about his rival. That's why Ken says he's now happy that he didn't run away again. Suddenly, a golden energy surrounds his body, showing all his strength for the fight. With his eyes glowing, he questions the enemy's audacity to appear in front of him. Filled with hatred, Yugo screams at his men, ordering them to attack with everything they've got. Following the order, the armed thugs ready their weapons and aim at the main target. Faced with the threat, Ken unleashes his power, raising his energy to the maximum possible limit. In the same instant, they begin firing a rain of bullets in his direction. Leaping over them, he prepares to end it all with a single strike. With his fist clenched, he channels his energy to deliver the devastating final attack. Then, his strike hits the ground, creating an explosion that throws everyone away. Landing in the middle of the crater, Ken punches the ground with energy still flowing. With a focused gaze, His eyes glow with the power released against all of them. Amidst the dust, Yugo Mizukami covers his face and coughs from the smoke, but he composes himself and stares at the scene with a look of pure indignation. Seeing the destruction, he realizes he's facing a true and terrible monster. Desperate, Yugo gives a new order, commanding his men to use the secret plan immediately. Despite the victory, Ken notices that his power isn't at the level it should be. Obeying their boss, the remaining thugs quickly put on their gas masks to continue. Watching the men, he wonders if they're the cause of his weakness. Then, a red smoke begins to spread across the ground around his energy. Noticing the smoke, he covers his face and understands what's happening. Mocking the situation, Yugo says he wasn't prepared to face a monster. Then he points a gun and orders Yanagimoto to die once and for all. Staring at the weapon, he wonders if it fires some kind of special bullet. Right after, Yugo fires a barrage of projectiles in his direction without hesitation. Dodging the shots, Ken moves quickly to escape the rain of projectiles. Hit by a graze, he's surprised by the force of such a common bullet. Needing shelter, he runs behind the rubble to protect himself from the shots. But a thug appears by surprise from behind and prepares to attack. Sensing the trap, he turns quickly and faces the new threat up close. With a quick strike, he hits the enemy's face with a brutal elbow. With the impact, the man is thrown far away, leaving one of his arms behind. Even victorious, he falls to his knees, panting and wounded from the difficult battle he fought. Taking advantage of his weakness, Yugo orders his thugs to shoot to kill without hesitation. Then, they fire a barrage of shots in Ken's direction to end it all. But he defends against the strikes, thinking he just needs to hold on until his power returns. With a punch to the ground, he releases a shockwave against all enemies. His energy explodes, hitting the thugs around him with a series of electric strikes. Watching the scene, Yugo is shocked by the power level his enemy displayed. Right after, he grabs two guns and shoots with full force in Ken's direction. Dodging the projectiles, Ken lands a spinning strike directly on his opponent's face. With the impact, Yugo is thrown backward, spitting blood through the air violently. Without wasting time, Ken advances quickly to continue his sequence of attacks against the villain. With his face wounded, golden energy drips from his eye like a tear. In that instant, another transformed enemy appears behind him for a completely surprise attack. The man advances quickly and tries to land a direct strike on Ken Yanagimamoto's head, but he dodges and counterattacks, landing a devastating blow on the transformed thug's face. His fist hits the man's mask, breaking everything in a single powerful strike. Piercing through the thug, Ken defeats him with a single powerful final blow. Fallen on the ground, Yugo kicks one of the cylinders to release the smoke throughout the area. Then, the object rolls across the ground, spreading the red gas throughout the field. Protected by the mask, he stares at his opponent with a look of pure hatred and contempt. But Ken just stands still, with his energy enveloping his entire body there. With a smile on his face, he comments that the last effort was really quite good. Looking up, Yugo sees Ken's imposing figure staring at him completely recovered. In an act of desperation, he shoots with his pistol without even aiming properly. Moving his head, Ken dodges the projectile with impressive and superhuman speed. Then, he walks slowly toward his enemy without showing any concern. Fallen on the ground, Yugo points the gun at Ken, preparing the last and decisive shot. He pulls the trigger, but the gun just misfires without shooting any remaining ammunition. Not understanding, he wonders why the gun didn't work at the final moment. With a cold gaze, Ken asks why he simply doesn't die already. Then, he opens his hand, revealing that he caught the bullet with his own fingers. Staring at his opponent, Yugo freezes with his eyes wide open in pure fear. Approaching him, Ken grabs him by the clothes and mocks the gas mask. In the reflection of his gaze, Ken's image prepares for the strike. With a devastating punch, he hits Yugo's face and breaks the mask. Right after, he continues the sequence of strikes with his closed and bloodied fist. Another even stronger blow hits Yugo's face, completely breaking his defense. With his face bruised, he realizes that his enemy is already almost passing out there. Then, he holds him and asks where all that courage from before went. Turning to the side, he faces the remaining thugs who watched the entire scene. While holding Yugo, Ken warns that this time he won't go easy at all. Hearing the warning, the men become desperate about what's going to happen now. Then, he rips an object from Yugo's neck and observes it carefully. Letting the item fall, the object hits the ground and catches their attention. Then he shows the antidote and asks if this is what they're looking for so much. But he reveals that there doesn't seem to be enough to cure all the thugs. With a cold look, he suggests they decide among themselves who will survive. Holding the object, Ken confirms that it was indeed the antidote they were all seeking. Right after, He crushes the item with his hand, destroying their only hope. But suddenly, Yugo grabs him by the arm with the strength he still had left. With his eyes glowing, he refuses to accept defeat and keeps resisting. Screaming with hatred, he warns that the fight between them still hasn't truly ended. Held by the mercenary, Ken tries to break free to avoid the worst that's coming. But the man, even covered in wounds, won't let go of his clothes no matter what. With his fist clenched, he prepares for a final and totally desperate attack. Then, the mercenary pulls the pin of an explosive that was hidden in his hand. Gritting his teeth, he bites the fabric even harder to keep Ken from escaping. His whole body then begins to twist with pure rage and determination. Right after, he lunges forward and tries to land a direct hit on his target's face. Screaming with hatred, the mercenary puts all his remaining energy into this suicidal move. Seeing this, Ken's eyes change color, revealing his true nature. Immediately, his own hand also begins to release an intense and accumulated energy. Then, Ken grabs the mercenary's fist and stops the attack at the last second. With a swift movement, he throws the enemy's body far away from there. Off balance, the man tries to steady himself on the ground to avoid falling from the impact. Observing his rival, Ken analyzes the situation with a cold and totally calculating look. But the enemy, furious, prepares another strike with his hand full of energy. Standing still and focused, Ken faces his enemy, releasing an intense and powerful energy. Charging forward with everything, the mercenary launches a powerful blow, covered by his energy. In the same instant, Ken counterattacks with a strike that clashes against his rival. Taking the direct impact, Ken's arm feels the absurd force of the attack. Without wasting time, he lands a potent blow right in the enemy's stomach. Feeling the pain, the mercenary's face twists with the force of the blow. But the mercenary strikes back right away, landing a hit back on Ken. With a serious look, he understands that this exchange of blows will be very dangerous. Recoiling with the impact, Ken drags his feet across the ground to maintain balance. Analyzing the damage, he realizes he can't keep taking so many hits like this. Determined to end this, he crouches down to prepare a definitive attack. Then, he shoots forward with everything and lands a devastating blow right on his chest. Surprised by the speed, the mercenary takes the attack head-on and without any defense. Being thrown far away, his body is hurled and destroys everything in its path. While observing the result, Ken feels that his strength is finally returning to normal. With his eyes glowing, Ken realizes that the fight still isn't truly over. Seeing the enemy fallen on the ground, he just watches, waiting for the next move. In the same instant, a strange pill on the ground catches everyone's attention. Right after, a box full of them is revealed there near the fight location. Without thinking twice, the man grabs a handful and throws everything in his mouth. Then, his body begins to react strangely, releasing a lot of energy. His muscles expand and twist as the transformation advances rapidly. Even his teeth change shape, becoming much larger and sharper. Completely transformed, he reveals himself to be Yugo, from the Council of Seven Stars. Full of power, he shows his monstrous body and totally out of control. Observing the scene, Ken realizes that the enemy's presence has completely changed. With a focused look, he understands that the situation has become even more complicated. But the monster advances toward him, screaming in a totally threatening way. Ken faces the enemy, reflecting the red energy in his own golden eyes. Then, the two run toward a final confrontation, advancing against each other. Exploding with everything, the impact of their clash destroys the entire scenery. Amid the rubble, the trail of destruction reveals the power of the great confrontation. Right after, Ken stands up injured, supporting his hands on the totally destroyed ground. Seeing his rival on the ground, Yugo mocks his power, feeling very superior. But Ken, with his head down, seems to concentrate, completely ignoring the enemy's provocation. With his eye glowing, Yugo feels the power of an awakened one for the first time. Expanding his body, he feels that now everyone seems like insignificant insects to him. Then, with a cruel smile, he decides that it's Ken's turn to become one. In the same instant, Ken's hand moves slowly amid the dust. Lifting his body, he admits that last blow really hurt a bit. Then, Yugo questions if he's going to keep lying to himself about his chances. Wiping his face, Ken realizes that his power seems to be being restricted by something. Then, with a confident smile, he reveals that he was never a level 3 user. Receiving the revelation, Yugo reacts with pure rage, not understanding the situation right. Totally confused, the monster is left without reaction, realizing what just happened. Holding the enemy's arm, Ken begins to disintegrate his body with his energy. With a determined look, he prepares to finish the confrontation once and for all. Screaming in pain, Yugo falls to his knees on the ground, unable to withstand the power. Remembering the promise, he faces his rival with hatred for being defeated. Gritting his teeth, he refuses to accept that this will be his end. Gathering his forces, he tries to stand up to continue the fight at all costs. Then he screams that a man like him would never end in this place. Then his body begins to heal from the wounds with an absurd speed. Noticing the regeneration, Ken analyzes the enemy's new power with great attention. Right after, the monster advances with everything on top of him in a direct attack. But suddenly, a new enemy appears and attacks Ken with a staff. Seeing the scene, the newcomer is left totally without reaction at what he sees. Retreating quickly, he moves away to prepare a new strike against the target. Next, the man attacks from above with his staff aiming directly at the head. But Yugo releases an energy attack, creating a vortex that sucks everything in. Analyzing the enemy's ability, Ken prepares to use a new power. Right after, the monster advances with everything on top of him in a powerful attack. With a downward blow, he hits the ground and causes a huge explosion, but Ken manages to defend himself from the impact, holding the great enemy's body. Then, he begins to push the monster away, using all his strength. Facing his rival, he warns that the enemy himself started this whole fight. Bringing his hands together, he begins to release an extremely strong and bright energy. With his face covered by an intense energy, he prepares the final blow. In this instant, his body explodes in energy, releasing an immense power against the enemy. Being caught by surprise, the monster faces the glare with an expression of shock.